"I'm downtown for an hour or so and thought you might have heard something about Mr. Gibson," she said. To PQ he explained that he might be away from the office for lunch longer than usual. "An angle concerning Gibson's disappearance that may develop something," he said, hoping it would be sufficient. "What is it?" demanded the city editor. "Well, Miss Carrillo, you remember, Gibson's friend, called me and I invited her to have lunch with me," John answered. "Hop to it," said PQ. Consuelo was in sport costume, silk knit jacket, saucy white hat, white skirt, shoes and hose, a trim, dainty figure, cool and refreshing. He had a curious feeling that their meeting was somewhat clandestine. "I thought you knew where Gibson went, but I refrained from calling you to ask," John said after they were seated in the booth. "Why didn't you?" "I didn't want you to become involved in this business." He almost said, "this mess." "And why not?" "If I had called you and you had told me where Gibson was, the other reporters would not rest until they found out my source of information and you would be brought into the whole affair," he explained. "I understand," she said. "Truly, though, I am beginning to worry. He gave me no hint that he even intended leaving the city and that is what puzzles me. Tell me, do you think there is any reason to fear that anything has happened to him?" "It's very improbable," he assured her. His conviction that Gibson and Gink Cummings were allied caused him to have no apprehension concerning the commissioner's safety. "He'll be back in a few days." "I do hope so," she said. "He is making such a success, isn't he?" "Yes." He was reluctant to give the affirmation. He conquered an impulse to tell her, to warn her, that it was more than probable Gibson was not the man she believed him to be. He wondered what she would say if he told her what had caused him to turn against Gibson. "I am very, very proud and happy," she said. "If anything should happen to him I don't know what I would do." The potentiality of the words, "if anything should happen to him," struck home hard on John. "It would be terrible," he said, avoiding her eyes. "He has been so considerate, so good," she said. "I feel that I owe him so much I can never repay." A decision flashed into his brain as she spoke. If the time ever came when enough evidence was obtained to expose Gibson, he would go to the commissioner and plead with him to renounce Cummings, for her sake. There might yet be a chance to save Consuelo from the disillusionment that was approaching. The fearfulness of Gibson's perfidy was almost incomprehensible. "I'm certain he does not think so," he said. "Do you know what he is planning for me now?" she asked, and then, before he attempted to reply, she added, "He plans to restore the wealth of the Carrillos." Her eyes sparkled as she spoke and she looked to him for his approval. "Oil has been struck within a mile or so of our ranch," she explained. "They have asked Father to sell or lease and Reggie has taken charge of it for us. Father has placed the whole business in his hands, he has so much confidence in him. He gave him an option on the ranch property and Reggie hopes to dispose of it for enough to bring back our lost fortune to us. Isn't it wonderful?" "It certainly is," he agreed. "The discovery of oil is the only get-rich-quick proposition that is above reproach. A person can be poverty-stricken one day and a millionaire the next and no one suffers by his quick acquisition of wealth. Oil is a treasure of nature bestowed by fate and it is needless for me to add that I hope that fate is good to you. It's all so complicated and technical that I cannot grasp it and Father never was a businessman. That is why Reggie is handling it for us," she said. "A new well is being bored only a few hundred yards from the ranch and everything depends upon whether oil is struck there. If they find oil it is almost certain that there is oil on our place. If no oil is found, then, of course, the value of the ranch diminishes. Oil, like gold, they say, is where you find it," John said. "And so is happiness, where you find it," Consuelo said. "That is what comforts me. Money does not necessarily bring happiness. Even if it turns out that no oil is found I can still be happy. I am happy now and why should I let anything like the loss of wealth, that never came to me, disappoint me?" Their luncheon finished, they walked to the street, where John found that the automobile placed at Consuelo's disposal by Gibson, he was certain of that now, was waiting for her. "Back to the studio and work again," she said. "I'm so glad we were able to meet today. I have enjoyed it more than you know. When Reggie returns we must arrange a dinner party, the three of us. And before long you and your mother must come out to the ranch. I haven't forgotten that." Her parting words brought back to John the bitter thought of his mother's intolerant prejudice against Consuelo as he returned to the office. He stopped at the city editor's desk to tell PQ that his meeting with Consuelo had failed to develop a single clue to Gibson's whereabouts. Nothing doing, he reported. What do you mean, nothing doing? Asked PQ. Then he added, Gibson showed up about an hour ago. He's back? Asked John. Back again, confirmed the city editor. Says he only went away to rest up. Claims he went someplace where he received no word from Los Angeles and didn't know crime had opened up again. What's he going to do about it? Oh, he came through with just about what was expected, said PQ, said he'd get right to work and put a stop to it. Blamed it all on the mayor and Sweeney. Says it's further proof that the police department is rotten. The last edition that night carried the banner line, Gibson returns to stop crime wave. Brennan and John sought Murphy, but being unable to locate him, had dinner downtown and continued their search during the evening. An hour before midnight they met him as he was returning to his room. Well, what's the word? Asked Brennan. I got what you're looking for, Murphy said. Da Gink has called off Da boys again. He passes out da word dat ders to be nuttin' doin' tonight, tomorrow night or until he says go. When did he give these orders, before or after Gibson came back? Asked Brennan. After, replied Murphy. And there'll be nothin' doin', see? All right, Murphy. Keep on the lookout and drop in tomorrow and we'll fix you up for this. I gotcha, said Murphy. 3 and 3 make 6, said Brennan to John as they left Murphy at the door of his rooming house. Gibson goes away and the Gink opens things up, Gibson comes back and he shuts down again. That's how they make it appear that they are enemies and that Gibson is the only man who can keep the town closed. That night the crime wave stopped as suddenly as it began. There was not a robbery, hold-up or ordinary theft reported to the police. The same order that prevailed when the Gink first decreed a lay-off prevailed and Gibson issued a triumphant statement to the reporters for the first editions in the morning. It demonstrates what little fear bandits and crooks have for the police under Chief Sweeney, a part of the statement read. It shows that the administration is so inefficient and corrupt that law and order must be enforced by citizens instead of by the officials whose duty it is to keep the lid down in Los Angeles. Another avalanche of resolutions praising Gibson followed the publication of this statement. The mayor was hotly condemned for his failure to remove Chief Sweeney at Gibson's request, and the commissioner was hailed as a man whose very name was enough to intimidate criminals and whose presence in the city was enough to keep outlawry and banditry at a minimum. One prominent citizen demanded that the mayor resign and that Gibson be appointed in his place by acclamation. Brennan, John and PQ held another conference with the publisher. It was decided that while the evidence before them, John's experience in the Spring Street raid and Murphy's information concerning Gink Cummings' moves in opening and closing the city while Gibson was in and out of it, was enough to convince them all that there was an alliance between Cummings and the commissioner, they lacked sufficient ammunition to break the story and expose the perfidious plot. Just a little more information, boys, something to show meetings between Gibson and Cummings or communications between them and we'll be ready to open fire, said the publisher. A week later Gibson summoned Brennan and John to his office. How are you, boys? He asked smiling. I called you up here because I have something to give you. He handed them a slip of paper. It was a check, his personal check, for $1,000. The space where the name of the recipient should appear was blank. This means, began Brennan. It means that I'm a candidate for mayor, said Gibson. Remember, I promised you I'd donate $1,000 to charity the minute I became a candidate for any public office. What shall it be? The Children's Hospital, said Brennan. Gibson seated himself at his desk and wrote in the name, blotted it carefully and tossed it toward them on the table. The formal announcement of Gibson's candidacy, which he gave to Brennan and John immediately after turning over to them the check for $1,000, made out to the Children's Hospital, followed the lines foretold by Brennan when he predicted the commissioner's entry in the mayoralty race. He declared he became a candidate at the persistent urging of organizations and individuals who had convinced him that he would deliberately evade a duty and service he owed the city if he refused. He reiterated his charges against the mayor and the administration, asserting that conditions as he found them in the city government were an intolerable disgrace. His campaign committee, chosen a few days after he announced his candidacy, included the names of 75% of the prominent and respected men and women of the city, as well as clubs and organizations representing the churches, civic improvement associations, manufacturers, businessmen and thousands of citizens. The Church Federation and the Ministerial Union, those two great bodies working always for the welfare of the city, gave him unqualified endorsements. The best people of the city advocated his election. Gibson's nominating petition was completed in less than a week. The rapidity of the completion of the petition was viewed as a criterion of the respective strength of the commissioner and of the mayor, whose supporters encountered considerable difficulty in obtaining signatures. It was 3 weeks before the mayor's petition could be got ready for filing. With the primary election 2 months away, the candidates began their campaigns at once. Gibson was everywhere, addressing meetings night and day. The enthusiasm with which he was received surpassed that ever given to any candidate in Los Angeles. Daily he was paraded through the downtown section of the city by cheering admirers. Gibson for mayor, banners and cards decorated the entire city. From their pulpits the ministers urged his election and took up his attack upon the administration. He was given credit unanimously for having clamped the lid down in Los Angeles tighter than it had ever been, and he was acclaimed as a fighting man because of his duel with Red Mike, and his personal leadership of the officers who raided the Spring Street handbook makers. The mayor was without ammunition to return Gibson's crossfire of charges against the administration. He was deserted, except for a few loyal supporters, who struggled vainly to stem the tide of popular favor as it swung to Gibson's side. Gibson scored heavily 3 weeks after his campaign was opened by hurling charges that Gink Cummings was contributing to the mayor's campaign fund and placing his sinister strength at his disposal to aid him to be re-elected. Astounded by his opponent's audacity, the mayor sent for Brennan and John. His mild blue eyes were blazing and he chewed vigorously at his cigar. "I'm licked, boys, unless I do something soon," he said. "I have to play a waiting game, but I can't afford to wait too long. I can't come out with the charge that Cummings and Gibson are plotting to steal the city. I haven't enough evidence. People would think I am crazy. As it is, he's getting away with everything. If the primary was tomorrow he'd snow me under. He's pulling all the tricks in the bag," admitted Brennan. "And I have nothing to come back at him with," the mayor complained. "Why don't you fire him from his position as police commissioner?" suggested Brennan. The mayor stopped short on the invisible path he had been pacing back and forth across his office. "Brennan," he said, "I thought you had more sense than to suggest a thing like that. What reason could I give for firing him? Say it's for the good of the service, that's all. And give him a chance to wail that I fired him because I am afraid of him, that I did it in desperation to save myself. Why, it would give him 10,000 votes of sympathy. No, Brennan, I must get something real to show that Gibson and Gink Cummings are partners." He turned and walked to the window, placing his hands on both sides of it, and leaned forward, his arms supporting him as he looked down into the busy traffic on Broadway. It was a position similar to that he had taken when John first met him, when he vowed to expose Gibson's alliance with Cummings, but the shoulders drooped and the outlines of his figure, silhouetted against the light streaming in the window, suggested great bodily and mental weariness. "Is it possible that I'm to go down to defeat, to disgrace, to ignominy, at the hands of such a despicable rascal?" he said, without turning, as though he was speaking to himself. "Is this to be my reward, my end? Are the people of my city to be led like blind sheep into a carnage of crime and graft?" Above the roar of the traffic in the street below, the strident voice of a newsboy, shouting his immature conception of the most important news in the latest editions of the afternoon papers, came up to them. "Gibson says de mayor's debunk," he shrieked. "Just out, The voice from the street broke the tense silence that had followed the mayor's soliloquy. He turned from the window quickly and strode back to his desk, and the suggestion of weariness dropped from him like a cloak, and he emerged, alert, taut, energetic, in fighting trim. "This won't do," he snapped, "this standing around and feeling sorry for myself. If I'm going down to defeat, I'm going down fighting, and when the day comes that the people discover what a hypocrite and crook this man Gibson is, they'll remember, at least, that I fought him to the last. And I'm not licked yet, not by a damn sight. I'm going to plug right along, and before another month passes I'm going to show this crook up if it's the last thing I do on earth." "That's more like it," approved Brennan. "I've been in a few forlorn hope fights before and have seen the impossible happen, in fact, helped it happen." "I'm depending on you more than anyone else," said the mayor. Turning to John he added, "And you, too, Gallant. The fault of crooks, and we're dealing with crooks, is that they can't think straight, all the time," said Brennan. "They always make a slip, sometime. I've never known it to fail. No matter how smart a crook is, he always makes one mistake. He can't help it. It's because he's a crook and can't think straight. It's up to us to see that we don't overlook the mistake that Gibson and the Gink will make." "Let's hope they make it soon enough," said the mayor. "The primary is only 5 weeks away, and if Gibson is to be exposed it must be within the next 4 weeks at the latest." I don't agree with you fully in that, said Brennan. It might be a good idea, if we get what we're looking for, to hold off until a few days before the election so that Gibson won't have enough time to reach the entire city with the story he'll frame up to come back with. We won't worry about that until we find enough to blast Gibson and Cummings once and for all, the mayor said. I have men working night and day trying to link the two together. I have tried fairly and honestly to discover where Gibson obtained the money he has. He was broke, flat broke, about the time I was elected, and suddenly he had all the money he required. Where it came from I can't find out. There is only one conclusion that I can see, and that is that Cummings gave it to him, just as I have contended from the start. Brennan and John saw Murphy regularly, meeting him at least once a day, hoping each time that he would bring them the information they sought. But he had little to tell them except that Cummings was enforcing his order that there should be no crime in the city. One night he brought him a story of how a rebellious gangster, becoming restless, had planned to commit a robbery despite the Gink's prohibitory order and had been promptly beaten up by Cummings thugs. A week after their last conference with the mayor, Brennan and John received a telephone message from Gibson's secretary, who told them that the commissioner wanted them to see him at his office immediately. Another grandstand stunt, I'll bet, Brennan speculated as they hurried to Gibson's office. It's about time for one. Gibson greeted him as affably as ever. As they entered his office he closed and locked the door behind them. Well, boys, he said, how do you think my campaign is coming? You're going strong, replied Brennan, truthfully. And how is my friend, the mayor? He isn't ready to concede defeat yet, Brennan said. He realizes, though, that you're gaining ground on him every day, or rather increasing the lead you had at the start. Gibson laughed. He had his chance, he said. I gave him warning, although I believe I don't have to tell you again, that I had no idea of ever running against him when he appointed me a commissioner. By the way, why doesn't he fire me? What for? Asked Brennan. Oh, I see, he figures it would hurt him more than do him good, concluded Gibson. Well, perhaps he's right. But I didn't send for you boys to talk politics. I have something I think will develop into a story for you, a real story, not the stuff my publicity man hands out. What is it? Gibson smiled and shook his head. I can't tell you now, he said. Be here tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock and you can be in on the whole business. I don't expect there'll be any shooting, but you might as well bring guns if you have them. Another red mic? Asked Brennan. Gibson smiled again. Be here and see, he said, inexplicably. Chapter 16. With Benton, the photographer, who performed his jig dance to the rhythm of Gunga Din, when he was told he faced another adventure, Brennan and John were in Gibson's office before 10 o'clock the next morning. They found Gibson alone in his inner office. No makeup, this time, eh? Asked Brennan, recalling, by inference, Gibson's unkempt costume on the night he shot it out with Red Mike and saved the Lark from destruction. Not necessary, replied the commissioner. Speaking of makeup, reminds me, Gallant, that Miss Carrillo asked me to tell you that she hasn't forgotten about our dinner party. It was the first time that Consuelo's name had been mentioned by either of them since that afternoon at the studio when Gibson had told John of their engagement. It would be unlike her if she had forgotten, said John, ready to let Gibson infer what he might from the words. He noticed that Brennan was looking at him curiously. Suppose we set it for the evening of the day I'm elected mayor, said Gibson, smiling. Over Gibson's shoulder John saw Brennan drop his right eyelid in a slow wink. That suits me, he replied. As Gibson turned toward his desk John returned Brennan's wink. Now, boys, let's get down to business, Gibson said as he turned back to face them, a paper in his hand. Here's the story. I'm going to arrest one of Gink, Cummings' lieutenants. The man I'm after is Big Jim Hatch, a notorious bunco swindler, and I've got him cornered but he doesn't know it. Hatch is Cummings' pal. They have known each other for years and worked together. Big Jim is one of the cleverest bunco men in the country, so clever that he has been indicted only once, although he has swindled victims out of hundreds of thousands of dollars. That indictment was returned against him in New York several months ago and he fled to Los Angeles, arranging with Gink Cummings to operate here and receive protection. This paper you see is a telegraphic warrant from New York for Hatch's arrest. I communicated with the New York authorities as soon as my detectives found that he was in the city and told me he was wanted in the East. They have trailed him day and night. The place where he is living is surrounded now by my men and deputy sheriffs who are waiting for me before making the raid and arresting him. Now, if you're ready, we'll go and you can ask me any questions you want on the way. He led them to an automobile parked in front of the office building. A liveried chauffeur sat at the wheel. John saw it was the machine that Consuelo had said had been placed at her disposal by a friend. He wondered why she never explained to him that it was Gibson's car. Gibson took the seat beside the chauffeur, while John, Brennan and Benton took the tonneau seats. The machine whirled away from the curb. "Any questions?" asked Gibson over his shoulder. "You've told us everything we need to know now," replied Brennan. As Gibson turned back to face the road before them, John glanced toward Brennan interrogatively. Brennan shook his head doubtfully as if he was puzzled by this new move by the commissioner. "I can't figure it out, yet," he whispered. In 20 minutes, at Gibson's order, the chauffeur stopped the automobile at a corner in West 11th Street. "We'll stop here and walk the rest of the way, it's only half a block," explained the commissioner. To drive up to the house would give 'em warning. Big Jim's house was in the middle of the block. It was square, of 2 stories and set well back from the street. The blinds were down in all of the windows and it had a deserted appearance. Out of range of sight from any of the windows, Gibson met a group of deputy sheriffs and his private detectives, one of whom stepped forward to address him. "He's in there, all right," the detective said. "We trailed him in last night and he hasn't put his nose out of doors since." "What are your orders, Mr. Commissioner?" "Who has the search warrant?" Gibson asked. "I have it," replied one of the deputy sheriffs. "I figured we might have to go in after him. Is the back of the house guarded?" Gibson demanded. 4 men are there and 4 others posted at the sides," he was told. "Good. Let's go then, I'll lead the way," said Gibson. He strode quickly toward the house and up the walk to the front door, followed by the detectives, the deputies, Brennan, John and the cameraman. John had a peculiar sinking feeling as he realized what open targets they were as they approached the house if Big Jim opened fire on them from behind the blind of one of the windows facing the street. Gibson rapped sharply on the door and they waited tensely for a response. The officers' right hands were on the handles of their automatics and revolvers. There was no response to Gibson's rap. He clenched his fist and hammered loudly on the solid panel of the door. Again no response. "You're certain he is inside?" demanded Gibson. "Absolutely, Mr. Commissioner," assured the detective. "He's probably at the door now." Gibson stepped to one side of the door and the others stepped back also. "Open the door or we'll break it down," commanded Gibson, shouting. A man's voice answered from behind the door. "What do you want?" it asked. "Open the door," said Gibson, ignoring the question. A key clicked in the lock and the door opened. 2 of the deputies sprang on the threshold beside Gibson, their automatics in their hands. "Put 'em up," they said sharply. A large, florid-faced man, wearing an expensive housecoat, with an expression of a respectable citizen highly outraged at what was before him, lifted his hands above his head. "What's the meaning of this?" he demanded indignantly. "There's no use pretending injured innocence, Hatch," said Gibson coolly. "We have a search warrant and a warrant for your arrest from New York." The 2 deputies with drawn guns searched Hatch for a concealed weapon, patting his pockets, which they found empty. As they stepped back, Big Jim dropped his hands to his side and smiled. "Very well, Mr. Gibson," he said obligingly. "Do your stuff." John was startled to hear Hatch call Gibson by name. Nothing had been said that even hinted of the commissioner's identity. The search warrant was handed Gibson. "Do you want me to read this?" he asked. "Don't trouble yourself," replied Hatch. "All I ask is that you don't tear things to pieces in here. Mrs. Hatch is with me and I don't want her to be bothered." "All right, boys, be quick about it," ordered Gibson, sending the officers to search the house, "and don't disturb Mrs. Hatch unless it's necessary." As the private detectives and deputies left them, Benton stepped forward with a request that Gibson and Hatch pose for a photograph. "You brought them with you, eh, Gibson?" said Hatch. Then to the photographer he added, "I'll accommodate you under one consideration." "Say it," requested Benton. "That you leave Mrs. Hatch out of this," said Big Jim. The photographer looked to Brennan for an answer to this proposal. "Go ahead, Benton," Brennan agreed, "we won't bother Mrs. Hatch." While Benton was photographing Gibson and Hatch, John observed the bunco swindler more closely. To all outward appearances, Big Jim might have been any one of the well-to-do businessmen one sees daily on the downtown streets. His hair was gray with a touch of white at the temples, his complexion ruddy. On the little finger of his plump, soft hand he wore a diamond ring in which the gem was the size of a pea. It was obvious that his suit was the work of a high-priced tailor. He had frank blue eyes that had a guileless expression, and there were no criminal characteristics in the shape of his head, the position of his ears and the contour of his lips. "I suppose you'll want me to go back with you," Hatch said to Gibson after Benton had made his final flashlight picture of them. "As soon as the search is completed," assented the commissioner. "Tell me, Hatch, what about this New York job?" Big Jim drew a cigar from his vest pocket, clipped off the end of it with a snap of his teeth and lighted it with a match. He puffed at the cigar, looked at it critically and smiled before he answered. "You can speak about that to my lawyer," he said. In pairs the deputies and detectives returned from their search of the house empty-handed. "Nothing worth taking," they reported. They prepared to leave. Hatch donned a suit coat and put on his hat. As they started toward the door, John was in the rear. He was about to step over the threshold to join the others outside when a hand touched his arm. He turned and faced a girl, a very pretty girl, he thought, with large blue eyes, golden hair and petite figure. "Are you a reporter?" the girl asked. "Yes," he replied, mystified. "Then please come back here. Tonight, I have something to tell you." The door closed and he was outside again. It was not until after Hatch had been lodged in the county jail to await the arrival of officers from New York and Brennan had written the story of Gibson's arrest of the swindler that John revealed that the girl, whom he presumed was Mrs. Hatch, had asked him to return to the house that night. The arrest of Big Jim was the outstanding local news story of the day. Gibson issued another statement in which he emphasized that Hatch was one of Gink Cummings' men, who completely escaped the notice of Chief Sweeney's inefficient detectives. When Brennan had handed to PQ the last sheet of his story of Hatch's arrest, John told him how the girl had stopped him at the door and asked him to return. "Great!" exclaimed Brennan. "I can't figure out Gibson's game in arresting Big Jim. She'll probably be able to give us the tip." "I wonder what she wants to tell me," said John. "Tell us, you mean," Brennan amended. "You don't think you're not going to take me along with you, do you?" A few minutes after 8 o'clock that evening, John and Brennan returned to the scene of their adventure of the afternoon. John rapped on the door and the girl spoke to them without opening it. "Who is it, please?" she asked. "It's the reporter you spoke to this afternoon," John said, and the door swung open. The girl stood with her hand on the knob. She glanced inquiringly toward Brennan. "My partner," John explained. "Come in," she invited, with a friendly smile. She waited until they had entered and then closed the door behind them, locking it carefully. Without speaking, she led them into a sitting room, artistically furnished, lighted only by a rose-shaded table lamp. She motioned them to a deep-cushioned davenport and seated herself in a chair under the light from the lamp. There was no doubt about it, she was pretty. Her blonde hair shone in the light and the shadows about her eyes added to their beauty. Her face was round and piquant, her lips a deep crimson and tiny. Her one-piece dress, on which beads sparkled, exposed a delicately rounded throat and slender white arms. Her hands were small and white and her fingernails were highly polished. Sheer silk stockings and neat, expensive shoes. A hint of cheapness about her, perhaps it was the unnatural thinness of the delicately arched eyebrows, John thought, or perhaps the shortness of her skirt, but she was pretty. "I suppose you understand that I am Mrs. Hatch," she said. They nodded. "Now," she continued, "can you give me some assurance that you are really reporters and not detectives?" They produced their press badges, which she examined under the light. Apparently satisfied, she looked at them for a moment and then spoke. "I want you to help me," she said, "help me and my husband." "If there is any legitimate way we can help you, we will," Brennan assured her. "I will begin at the beginning and tell you everything," she said. "When I have finished, you can tell me what you can do for me. In the first place, I am speaking to you because my husband is afraid to say anything. He does not know that I am going to tell you this, but I am doing it to save him, because," she hesitated, "I love him. Jim was indicted back in New York and came here to escape arrest. We arrived here 5 months ago. Whether Jim is guilty of what he is charged with in New York is for him to say. All I know is that he was indicted and that we came to Los Angeles to escape the officers. We came here because Jim was a friend of Gink Cummings and he thought that Cummings would protect him. Jim saw Cummings soon after we reached the city and Cummings greeted him like a long-lost brother. He said that we could hide in Los Angeles and be reasonably sure that the New York officers would never learn we were here. A month after we came here we ran out of money and Jim decided to get to work again. You can guess how Jim planned to work. I need not tell you more than that. Before another month went by he had the money. It wasn't as much as he had hoped for and we were disappointed. We knew that every time he went to work he not only risked new trouble, but identification as the man who was wanted in New York. That is why his jobs had to be few and far between. We planned to make every cent of the money last as long as we could. Of course, Gink, Cummings knew what Jim had done. When the job was completed he called Jim to his office and told him that he would have to split what money he had got with him. He told Jim that no one worked in Los Angeles without giving him at least a 10% cut, for protection. Jim was surprised. He had figured that Cummings was his friend. He told Cummings that he could not afford to split with him and explained how it was, that he could not risk working often and had to make his money last. He thought that this explanation would satisfy the Gink, but it didn't. They quarreled. Cummings told Jim that he could not work in Los Angeles or stay here unless he came through. Jim told him to go to I'll tip New York that you're here, Cummings told him. Jim told him to go to it, that he was in trouble and needed help instead of being compelled to put himself in danger. We were afraid that Cummings would follow out his threat and tip the New York police, so we left the city. We went to San Diego for a month and then, figuring that Cummings would believe we had left for good, came back to Los Angeles again. We were safe enough until a month ago when Jim did another job. He had to, we were broke. Cummings found out about it and came to see Jim. He came here, to this house. He sat where you are sitting now. While he was talking to Jim I was behind the curtain there and heard every word. She indicated portieres behind them. I won't repeat everything I heard, although I could if it was necessary. Cummings said he had heard Jim had done another job and came to him for his split. You got away with it once, Jim, he said. I didn't do anything but you've got to come through this time. I run things here in Los Angeles, let me tell you that. You're an old pal and all that and I'd like to let you alone, but I can't afford to. The boys are hollering because you're working without kicking in and for my own protection you've got to split. And what'll you do if I don't? Jim asks. Well, says Cummings, I could have you croaked. When he said that I thought Jim was going to kill him right here, but he kept control of himself. Or, says Cummings, I'll have you pinched for that New York job. Jim smiled when he heard that. Who'll do the pinching? He asked. One of your paid cops. It'll be somebody bigger than a cop, said Cummings. John felt Brennan move forward on the Davenport. Somebody bigger than a cop. Are you sure he said that? Brennan asked. Those were his words, Mrs. Hatch answered. Who'll that be? Asks Jim. Never mind who it'll be, says Cummings, you'll find that out when it happens. Now, I'm giving you your last chance, either come across or go back and do your bit, what's it going to be? I know Jim. I know he would rather have died than to have given in to Cummings. Nothing doing, Gink, Jim says. All right, Jim, says Cummings, don't ever say I didn't give you a chance. Then he left. I was afraid. I begged Jim to split with Cummings and make the most of it. But he was stubborn. I'd rather go to the pen than split with that cur, he says to me. So nothing more happened until today and you were here and saw it. Now, this is how I think you may be able to help us. You saw who it was who arrested Jim. It was Gibson, the police commissioner, who is running for mayor. Gibson must have been the man Cummings referred to when he said that it would be somebody bigger than a cop who would arrest Jim. Gibson could never have known anything about Jim unless Cummings told him. Gibson and Cummings must be working together, somehow. The only reason Jim was arrested was because he wouldn't split with Cummings and it's Gibson who arrests him. Can't you see the connection? Jim can tell you every word I've told you and a lot more and there should be some way of using it to aid him. I don't know how, but there should be some way. If he told everything to the district attorney here, don't you think it might help him a little? You see, Cummings wants him sent back to New York as soon as possible so he won't start talking. He won't say anything about what Jim has done here because he wants him out of the state. I thought that if Jim would tell his story to the district attorney or to some newspaper it might be arranged to have some recommendation for leniency for him when he goes back to New York. Or, he might be able to have the charge back there dropped and get immunity out here. She paused. There was a tense silence until she spoke again, softly. You see, she said, I love Jim and he loves me. We had decided, after this experience with Cummings, to go straight. Jim told me that he would work the rest of his life to pay back whatever he had taken wrongfully and we would be happy together. We wouldn't have to live in fear and the day would come when we could hold up our heads and have a little home and children. John thought he saw tears in her eyes as she ended the sentence. I have trusted you in telling you this, she said. I feel that I can trust you. Tell me, please tell me, can anything be done with what I've told you? She looked toward them pleadingly, anxiously. Brennan was sitting on the edge of the davenport, his body bent forward, his elbows on his knees, gazing intently at the girl. A crook can't think straight all the time, he said, quietly. Gink Cummings has made his mistake. Chapter 17. The story told by Evelyn Hatch, Evelyn was her given name, was twice repeated by John and Brennan the next day, first to PQ and then to the publisher of their paper. It was decided that Hatch's own story should be obtained and, if possible, put in affidavit form. Following their conferences with PQ and the chief, they went directly to the county jail where Big Jim was brought down from his cell at their request. He greeted them genially, offering them cigars as they led him to a quiet corner of the reception room. I always try to be a good scout with newspapermen, Hatch said, smiling. I've had considerable experience with reporters and I've always found them square and fair. And, without speaking personally, of course, I can tell you that you reporters do more to eradicate crime than all the police in the country. Hatch, said Brennan, ignoring the compliment, we've had a talk with your wife. You promised me you'd let her alone, said Big Jim, sharply. We never spoke to her until she told us she wanted to see us, John put in. As I was leaving the house after you were arrested she stopped me and asked me to come back, saying she had something to tell me. The anger that had blazed in Hatch's eyes when he suspected them of violating their promise softened to tenderness. Poor kid, he said, it's a hard job for her. He hesitated a moment and then added, she's the only one in the world who really cares what becomes of me. Well, what did she have to say to you? You can guess, can't you? Asked Brennan. I suppose I could, but I'm not going to, returned Hatch. She wants to help you, said Brennan. You don't have to tell me that. What she told us she revealed with the sole thought of trying to help. Drawing mild little puffs of smoke from his cigar, Big Jim waited silently, thoughtfully, for Brennan to continue. She told us about your trouble with Gink Cummings, the whole business. Brennan watched Hatch's face intently as he spoke. And to prove it I'll repeat her story to us, exactly as she told it. While Brennan was relating what Mrs. Hatch had told them, Big Jim sat motionless in his chair, his head bowed on his chest. John watched the ash in Hatch's cigar turning from a glowing red to a heatless gray. When Brennan finished Hatch spoke without raising his head. Poor little kid, he said, tenderly. He straightened up in his chair, tossed away his cigar and scrutinized Brennan keenly. Every word she spoke is the truth, every word of it, and more, he said. I've decided to take my jolt back in New York so I can get back to her as soon as I can. She'll wait for me, I know she will. Whether you can help me or not, I'll tell you everything. John felt his heart jump in his breast. When? Asked Brennan quickly. Now, said Hatch. Shoot, said Brennan. There's no use going over what Evelyn told you again, said Big Jim, without a second's hesitation. I'll swear to every word she said. But there's something she didn't tell you, because she didn't know it. Did you notice that I called Gibson by name when he arrested me? Brennan nodded. Well, where do you suppose I saw him to know him by sight? Without waiting for an answer, he snapped out. In Gink Cummings' apartment. John discovered that he had been holding his breath. Gibson in Cummings' apartment. A thrill like a mild electric shock shot up and down his spine. The Ginks' apartment? Asked Brennan. That's the place, Hatch confirmed. It was about a month ago. I can give you the exact day an hour later. I went to Cummings to try to settle things between us, without Evelyn knowing it. We were alone together when someone knocked on the door. Cummings answered it. As he left the room he pulled the door to close it, but it swung back open and I saw into the hallway. I saw Gibson enter. I didn't know who it was then and suppose it was pure curiosity that made me watch them. They talked for a minute and then Gibson started toward the door of the room I was in. As he did so, Cummings saw that the door was open and stepped over and closed it. That was all I saw. I heard Cummings say, "Don't do this again." When he came back he told me there could be no settlement between us except I split with him and I left. The next day I saw Gibson's photograph in a newspaper and it nearly knocked me off my chair. Just to make sure I hunted Gibson up and when I saw him I knew I couldn't have been mistaken. Gibson was the man I saw in Cummings' apartment. I'm sure that Cummings doesn't realize that I saw Gibson that night. If he had known it he would never have had me arrested and yet I was afraid to threaten him with it. I thought that if I told him I had seen Gibson at his place he would have bumped me off, but now that I'm here in jail I have nothing to fear. He won't dare to tell the authorities about my jobs in Los Angeles because if he does he'll make my story stronger. Besides, all he knows is that I got the money. He doesn't know whom I got it from or when or how. That's my addition to Evelyn's story. That's how I knew it was Gibson when he stepped in to arrest me. You can see how it worked out. When I defied Cummings, he arranged with Gibson to arrest me. He had Gibson do it because Gibson is his man and he wants the public to think that they are enemies. I'm telling you this because after I do my bit back in New York I'm going straight with Evelyn. I'm going to pay back every cent I ever took from anyone and, perhaps, sometime we'll have a home and, what she said. Overwhelmed mentally by the condemning information against Gibson which had been given them by Big Jim, John was startled by Brennan's first words after Hatch had stopped speaking. "What a fat head I am!" Brennan exclaimed. Hatch's face showed that he shared John's surprise at Brennan's ejaculation. "Oh, what a sap I am!" he continued. Why haven't we shadowed them? Why haven't we followed them night and day until we found them together? Why didn't one of us spot the Ginks' apartment?" "You're lucky you haven't," Hatch put in. "You couldn't have gotten away with it. They probably would have killed you. Anyway, I doubt very much if they actually meet each other now. The Gink warned Gibson when I saw them that he was not to do this again, which meant he shouldn't come to the apartment. They're in communication with each other, somehow," said Brennan. "There's the telephone, or they may be using the mails, or they may have a confidential agent, a go-between," Hatch suggested. "I don't think the Gink would take a chance with a go-between," said Brennan. Before they left him to hurry back to the office, Hatch agreed to make an affidavit containing what he had told them, including the portion of the story told by his wife, and had consented to allow them to obtain a sworn statement from Mrs. Hatch. "There's only one thing wrong with what we got from Big Jim," Brennan said as they left the jail, "and that is that it comes from a man facing a term in the penitentiary. It's difficult for people to believe a confessed swindler like Hatch, although he's telling the truth. Even his wife's story would be received skeptically simply because she is his wife. Gibson has such a hold on the city, such a reputation for honesty and integrity, such influential support, that his mere denial of what Hatch says would be believed implicitly. But consider Hatch's story along with the framed-up Spring Street raid and the information we have of how Cummings opened and closed the town to convince the people that Gibson is the only man who can stop crime," John argued. "We must look at it from the reader's viewpoint," said Brennan. "It's the reader whom we have to convince. He wants facts, plain, hard facts. We have nothing to actually show that Cummings framed the Spring Street raid in collusion with Gibson. We have nothing to actually show that the opening and closing of the city by Cummings was to build up a reputation for Gibson. All that is mere inference, suspicion. And the weakness in Hatch's story is in the fact that he is a crook himself, although you and I know that he told us the truth." "Then we haven't enough yet," said John. "I'm afraid not. But you said last night that Cummings had made his one big mistake. And I wasn't wrong when I said it. We don't have to take Hatch's story simply as it stands. It's up to us now to get corroboration enough to make it undeniable." "How?" "By finding someone who has seen Gibson visit Cummings' apartment, a janitor, a neighbor, the clerk at the desk, anyone. Suppose no one saw him. Then we must find out how they are communicating with each other. We can tap the telephone in Cummings' apartment and those at Gibson's office and home if it comes to that." PQ and the chief upheld Brennan's judgment that Hatch's story needed more corroboration than that given by his wife and that the attack on Gibson, exposing him as a fraud, would have to be postponed until one more link was added to the chain of evidence against him. It was decided that Brennan and John should concentrate their endeavors in an effort to discover the method of communication between Gibson and the Gink. That night John saw Consuelo again and realized with a suddenness that shocked him that he loved her. The tremendousness of his realization that he was in love with her frightened him, and yet he was gloriously happy. Exultant joy, a rapture faintly akin to the ecstasy that had thrilled him the first Christmas morning he could remember, gave a buoyancy to his brain, his heart, his soul. He knew that he had loved her from the moment he met her, and regardless of what the future held for them he would go on loving her forever. Returning to his desk after the conference in the chief's office on the story told by Big Jim Hatch, John found a sheet of copy paper stuck in the roller of his typewriter. That was the office boy's way of leaving memoranda of telephone calls for the reporters. "Call Miss Carrillo at the studio," John read. He went immediately to the telephone booth. "There will be a preview of the picture, my latest, here tonight and I thought you might like to see it," she said. Reggie is so busy campaigning that he can't be here, she added. I would like it, he told her. Can you come? Yes, certainly. Splendid, she said. The preview will be at 7:30, but can't you get here earlier so we can have dinner together and talk? At 6, then, he suggested. At 6, she assented. He wondered why it was he felt relieved when she said that Gibson would not be there with them. It was dusk when he reached the studio a few minutes before 6. She had waited for him in her dressing room, to which he was escorted by the maid. There's a little place a few blocks away where we always go for dinner when we're kept late, she said. I discovered it myself. I delight in finding little out-of-the-way places to eat. Reggie can't understand it. He's uncomfortable every minute of the time we're there. You would have liked my father, he said. Almost every week he treated Mother and me by taking us to dinner at some genuinely picturesque place he had found. Sometimes it would be a little Spanish restaurant in Sonora Town, sometimes an Italian cafe in North Broadway, and sometimes a French table d'hôte, which I liked best. Mother was like you say Gibson is, uncomfortable every minute, but Father and I enjoyed it immensely. One night, when Mother wasn't with us, we had tamales at one of those wagon lunch places drawn up at the curb near the plaza and lighted by a sputtering kerosene range and a lantern that gave it an appearance of being a ship's cabin. I'll never forget it. You miss your father greatly, don't you? She said. The sympathy in her voice was like soothing music. Everything in me that amounts to anything I owe to him, he said. They walked to the little place around the corner, as Consuelo referred to it. The dinner was served to them at a corner table in a spotlessly clean room of Mother Graham's cafe, which was only large enough to accommodate a dozen couples. The proprietress, Mother Graham, who took as much pride in her cookery as the chef of the most expensive cafe, greeted Consuelo effusively. And how's my little darling, tonight? She asked. Mother Graham shall serve you herself, for it's not every night that I see your dear face. The dinner was plain, appetizing home cooking, delicious brown chops, crisp cool salad, fragrant coffee and hot rolls, berries and cream. Once John caught a glimpse of Mother Graham pointing out Consuelo to a pop-eyed girl and her youthful escort as Jean Hope. I am being envied, he said across the table. By whom? By everyone who sees us. I do not blame them, for I am to be envied. Because you are with Jean Hope. She smiled. Because I am with Consuelo Carrillo, he answered. I do not know Jean Hope yet. I am to meet her, tonight. You saw her before the camera, she reminded him. But never on the screen, he returned. And what if you don't like her? My consolation will be that she is only a shadow, a make-believe. You are different, she told him, and it's not because you lack imagination. Most everyone does not disassociate a film player from her shadow. They think of her always as the type or character in which they admire her most. To them she is always the same, always perfect, a picture, a memory. How disappointed those dream lovers would be if they could suddenly be brought face to face with the player as she really is, with her little vanities and human frailties. Disappointed or disillusioned, which? He asked. You are right, she replied, they would be disillusioned rather than disappointed. There is a difference. For instance, I would be disappointed rather than disillusioned in Reggie if he should blunder and miss his opportunity of becoming mayor of Los Angeles. Her words struck him like a blow. They brought to him the realization again that she faced a disillusionment of which she had no warning. How could he save her from it? Would she go on believing in Gibson? It would be like her to defend him until the last, to go with him to a place where his disgrace was not known and begin life all over again. Suppose, he said, watching her intently, that it was not disappointment but disillusionment. You mean, in Reggie? She asked, apparently unable to comprehend what he had said. Unable to speak the word, he nodded. She laughed lightly and he forced himself to smile. I know him too well to ever be disillusioned, she said. Love, they say, is blind, he ventured. I know his faults as I do mine, she said slowly, and love him for them. You see, we've known each other since we were children. He could not reply. The awfulness of the truth dumbed him and an impetuous desire to protect her swept through him. But he was powerless, helpless. A wild idea of sacrificing his loyalty to his paper by warning Gibson of the impending exposure of his perfidy so that he might renounce Gink Cummings and be worthy of Consuelo's love flashed in and out of his brain. His silence seemed to mystify her. When she spoke it was as though she might have a vague premonition of his confused thoughts. But there's no need for my having an apprehension that he will blunder, is there? She asked. We all make mistakes, he said, conscientiously trying to assure her. He realized, however, that his answer sounded evasive and fearful of further questioning. He added, hastily, his election is conceded by everyone. They rose from the table. To Mother Graham, perched on a stool behind a cash register near the door, he paid for their dinner and they stepped out into the street. Night had descended quickly. The cool, refreshing breeze from the ocean that tempers the warmth of the day was coming in gently, caressingly, soothingly from the west, and worries fled away with it like dead leaves whisked from the trees. During the preview, which lasted an hour and a half, John had but few chances to converse with Consuelo. She was busy with Bonwit, the director, and a half-dozen others whom John decided were the technicians whose business it was to revise the film before it was released. They sat grouped in a semicircle and several times certain scenes were flashed on the screen repeatedly for closer observation. The girl he saw on the screen was much more like Consuelo in real life than the girl he had seen before the camera. The makeup that had transformed her features for her part in the picture was indiscernible on the screen, and marvelously the real Consuelo was before him. The close-up, for which she had posed alone, holding the bouquet of daisies, was even prettier than it had been when she enacted it. He realized now what were the results sought by the cameramen in shifting the reflectors. Like a halo, sunlight shone around her face, through the loose tresses of her hair, giving it an ethereal appearance. So intently did he study every move, every expression of Consuelo's on the screen that he had completely overlooked the story of the photoplay. The scene in which the actor embraced Consuelo and gazed fervently heavenward was far more impressive than it had been when it was enacted, and the close-up of his features, over her shoulder, John decided was really an excellent bit of facial expression. When the preview was completed and the lights were flashed on again in the small room, Consuelo came directly to him. "Now, what do you think of Jean Hope? Do you like her?" she asked. "I adore her," he said, without restraint. The almost timid look of incredulousness he remembered having noticed when he told her she was beautiful at the Barton Randolph lawn fete came into her eyes. For a fraction of a second they looked into each other's faces, and something that she saw told her that his adoration was not only for the image of herself that he had seen upon the screen. She caught her underlip between her teeth and looked down. "We can go now," she said, a note in her voice that he had never heard before. They did not speak as they walked toward the gates of the studio, and it was then he realized that he loved her. In that moment he was transported to an indescribable happiness. She seemed a fairy creature at his side, too beautiful to touch, too wonderful to speak to. An automobile stopped beside them. Bonwit, at the wheel, leaned out over the side. "Can't I give you two a lift home?" he asked. John looked toward Consuelo and heard her say, "No, thanks, it's only a few blocks home and we'll walk. It's such a glorious night." Chapter 18. Consuelo was the first to speak as they passed through the studio gateway to the sidewalk overhung by the drooping branches of tall pepper trees. "It's not far," she said. The words awoke John from his enthrallment, and she saw by his glance toward her that he did not comprehend their meaning. "It's not far to the house," she explained. "Not far." He wished it were miles away, that they might walk on together for hours. "I could not bear being cramped up in an apartment," she added. "When it became necessary for me to find some place to live in Los Angeles, a dear friend, you must meet her, and I hunted up this little place for our home. It wasn't much to look at when we found it, but we have made it over to suit us and we have both grown to love it." "Your friend, is she in pictures, too?" he asked. "Betty is an artist," she replied. "She designs sets and costumes for pictures, and she is wonderful. She knows everything about her work, more than anyone else in Hollywood, they say. She deserves all the credit for turning our little home into a dream place." "You will miss her when," he found himself unable to finish the sentence, "you are married." "Yes," she said. "I'll miss her and our little home. Really, I don't believe I will know how to act if I become the wife of the mayor of Los Angeles. I have grown to detest formality, dances and dinners and receptions and things. If there is one thing Reggie and I will quarrel about, that will be it. He has always been invited everywhere and he enjoys the niceness of conventionality." He was glad that there was not complete compatibility between her and Gibson. It was selfish and wrong for him to rejoice that she and Gibson were not perfectly suited in their likes and dislikes, and he knew it, but nevertheless it gladdened him. "I nearly died of fright that day at the lawn fete, when I met you," he said. "I believe I would have done something disgraceful to that servant who was asking me to leave if you hadn't appeared." "You told me you thought Reggie to be a villain," she reminded him, laughing. You don't think him one now, do you? How close he came to telling her then what he had reason to believe Gibson actually was, a villain beyond all understanding, she never knew. No, he lied. She stopped at a gateway formed by a gap in a hedge of spicy-scented boxwood that paralleled the sidewalk. Here we are, she said, turning in. He saw a rose-shaded light in the window of a small house set far back from the street. Betty is waiting for me, she explained. I want you to meet her. On each side of the pathway leading back to the house was a rose garden with the bushes set at precise intervals. The rose garden ended halfway back from the sidewalk. Before the house, for the entire width of the lot and a dozen paces deep, was closely cropped grass. Flat stones, set into the lawn like the footprints of an elephant, provided an artistic path to the door, which was massive in size and of unfinished stained oak. The flanges of the hinges were of beaten iron held in place by studded bolts. A quaint knocker was above the handle to the latch. You'll pardon me for a moment? Consuelo asked, opening the door and stepping inside, returning a moment later to hold it open for him to enter. The room was exceptionally large, with rafters across the ceiling. At one end was a huge fireplace and rugs were scattered over a smooth but unpolished floor. Betty rose from an easy chair as he entered. She had been reading. John saw that she was slender, dark-eyed, rather pretty. Betty, this is Mr. Gallant, said Consuelo by way of an introduction. Consuelo has spoken of you, often, said Betty, advancing with a friendly smile and an outstretched hand. Mentally John thanked her for the words. He knew instinctively that he would like her and that she would be a friend to him. Miss Carrillo has been more than kind to me, he said. I often wonder why she is, he added, returning Betty's smile. She likes you, said Betty, with a frankness that startled him a little. He glanced toward Consuelo and saw that she was regarding Betty with an amused look. Betty moved toward a door at the side of the room. Will you care if I leave you? She said. Please do not think it rudeness. I have been doing a little studying which I must finish tonight and… I'm intruding, I know, interrupted John. You're not, she remonstrated with the candidness that John found later was so engaging. Her smile overcame his temporary embarrassment. I'll see you again, I'm sure, she added, nodding slightly before she stepped into the other room, closing the door behind her. What do you think of our little home? Consuelo asked as he turned toward her. She was seated in the chair Betty had left. It's like you, he said, feeling free to take the chair near her. It is so genuinely beautiful. This time he felt no hesitancy in saying it. And what of it do you like best of all? She asked quickly. He looked around the room slowly until his eyes rested on a wide casement window opening out over a deep sill on which blood-red geraniums nestling in the rich green foliage of the plant, grew in a box. Faintly, against the skyline as he looked through this window he saw the curving outline of a hill. The window panes, swung inward, were divided into small squares by the crosspieces. That, he said, without turning his eyes from the window. I knew. She hesitated. He glanced toward her inquiringly. I knew you would, she said. That is my window. The hill you see from it is my hill. Did you ever read the verse by Martha Haskell Clark that inspired the designing of that window? He shook his head. She rose and crossed to the window and stood framed to her waistline in the outer casement. She looked out into the night, toward her hill, the fingers of one hand touching the petals of one of the crimson blossoms. Softly she recited. Life did not bring me silken gowns, nor jewels for my hair, nor sight of gabled, foreign towns in distant countries fair, but I can glimpse, beyond my pain, a green and friendly hill, and red geraniums aflame upon my window sill. The brambled cares of every day, the tiny humdrum things, may bind my feet when they would stray. But still my heart has wings, while red geraniums are bloomed against my window glass, and low above my green sweet hill the gypsy wind clouds pass. And if my dreamings ne'er come true, the brightest and the best, but leave me lone my journey through, I'll set my heart at rest, and thank thee, God, for home sweet things, are green and friendly hill, and red geraniums aflame upon my window sill. He gazed into the empty fireplace as the words of the verse sang through his mind. But still my heart has wings, gypsy wind clouds, and if my dreamings ne'er come true, I'll set my heart at rest. He mused over them. His heart had wings to soar high with his soul in the ecstasy of his newfound love. And if his dreaming never came true, could he set his heart at rest? Or, her dreams, her expectation of happiness with Gibson, when they were shattered, could she set her heart at rest and thank her God for home sweet things, her green and friendly hill, and red geraniums aflame upon her window sill? He looked up from the ashes of the fireplace, where flames had sparkled to cheer and comfort her. She was still looking out toward her green and friendly hill, and the listlessness of her outline told him that she, too, was musing. He longed to know her thoughts. Very slowly she turned her face toward him. There was a suggestion of somberness in her eyes as she looked down at him. "I arranged this window just for that," she said. "Why did you know I would choose it as the part of the room I liked best?" he asked. "Because I've found we both love the simple things, the home sweet things, the enduring things of life," she answered. "Is that why you have been so kind to me?" "Please don't think of it as kindness," she said. She was back in the chair she had left to stand beside the window. "That is why I have arranged to see you as often as I have, if that is what you mean." An impulse overwhelmed his self-imposed restraint. "If anything ever happens to cause you to have doubt in me," he said, earnestly, "will you try to believe that I did what I thought was right?" The nature of his question, its suddenness, astonished her. She moved her lips to speak. "Don't ask me why I asked you that," he said, "but promise me, that you'll do your best to think of me as doing what I believed was right." "I'm bewildered, but you have my promise," she answered. The clock on the mantel above the fireplace chimed midnight. He rose. "I have been thoughtless," he said. "I had forgotten the time." She walked with him to the door. "Good night," he said, "and thank you." "Good night," she said, dropping the hand she had given him to her side. He strode out into the night. Subconsciously he waited for the door to close behind him. Each step took him farther toward the street, and yet he did not hear the click of the latch. At the sidewalk he turned to look back. She was standing, framed in the soft light shining through the doorway, looking out at him. He waved his hand. He saw her hand flutter, and then the door closed. "Still my heart has wings," he repeated to himself as he turned away. The primary election was only 2 weeks away. Gibson, with a powerful combination of organizations behind him, was swinging into the final lap of his campaign with unabated success. That he would snow the mayor under at the primary was conceded everywhere. Facing humiliation in the most decisive defeat in the history of the city, the mayor's organization dwindled down to a few never-say-die supporters whose activities were almost laughable in the prospect of Gibson's overwhelming victory at the polls. To the list of organizations endorsing the police commissioner was added the Anti-Saloon League. Seeking corroboration of the story told them by Big Jim Hatch, which they had in affidavit form from Big Jim and Mrs. Hatch, John and Brennan visited the downtown apartment house where Gink Cummings resided and where Hatch claimed to have seen Gibson. Cautiously they questioned the janitor, the clerk at the desk, the elevator boy, and even the proprietor without success. None of them had ever seen a man answering Gibson's description enter the building. Probably the time Hatch saw Gibson at Cummings' apartment was the only time Gibson ever visited the Gink there, and, because it was late at night, no one happened to see him, said Brennan. "It is beginning to look as though we'll have to tap either Gibson's or Cummings' telephone if the chief wants to go that far." Then, late one afternoon, John received a telephone call from Murphy. "Meet me tonight at 2nd and Spring," said Murphy. "I got something for ya, see." "Is it worthwhile?" asked John. "I'm not sayin' nothin' now, see," said Murphy. "Just be there at 10 bells, see." "We'll be there," John told him. "I wonder what is stumbled across," said Brennan when John informed him of their appointment to meet Murphy. "I asked him and he wasn't sayin' nothin', see," said John. "Don't," pleaded Brennan, "you'll have me doing it." That night at a few minutes at 10 they were standing on the steps at the entrance to the Bryson block when Murphy, his peaked cap pulled down far over his eyes and his coat collar turned up close around his throat, sidled up to them. "What's the big idea of covering up your face, Murphy?" asked Brennan. "I'm takin' no chances of gettin' made, see," Murphy answered. Made, John remembered, was the slang of detectives for identification. When a person was made, he was identified. "Well, then, what's the program?" asked Brennan. "I think I got them," Murphy replied. "Got who?" "De Gink and Disbird Gibson." "How?" "Meetin' each other." "The hell you say?" Brennan ejaculated. "Have you seen 'em together?" "Well, if de bird I figure is Gibson is him, I got 'em, see." "Where?" demanded Brennan. "De gallant kid here knows de place," said Murphy. "Remember da room where ya got paid off when ya got pinched in de handbook raid?" John nodded. That's Dar joint. John recalled the windowless cubby hole in the rear of the Spring Street saloon where Slim Gray, Cummings' lieutenant, had returned to him the $10 he had put up in bail and $10 as compensation for having been on hand when Gibson made the sensational raid. "Murphy," said Brennan, "just start in at the beginning and tell us about this, and please don't put any more C's into it than you absolutely have to." "Well, here's Dar stuff. Dar other night I'm comin' in late from Dar fights at Vernon, see. I'm between Main and Spring, see. When I make a bird stand and all by his lonesome at Dar entrance to Dar Alley. Dis bird is kinda nervous and jumpy like, see. And I figure he might be a stick-up. I ain't got no jack with me, so I keeps on walkin' right at him, see. Well, I'm about 20 feet from him, see. When I make another bird crossin' Tar Street toward him. When I get up to them, see. They're just about to meet, see." "Murphy," interrupted Brennan, "for heaven's sake forget those C's." Murphy grinned and went on. "Well, just as des two birds meet I get a flash of Dar mug of Dar guy dat crosses Dar Street, se, go ahead, say see, all you want to," said Brennan impatiently. "I get a flash of Dar bird's mug, see. And I make him, see. It was Dar gink, see. I try to make Dar other bird, but he turns into the alley quick, see. Well, I keep right on my way and then come back, see. I stick my nut around Dar corner of Dar building and watches them. They hurry down Dar alley, see. And ducks in a door. Well, I'm not takin' no chances of gettin' plugged, see. So I don't follow them. I just hang around for an hour and waits for them to come out again, see. When they come out Dar door I spot it and duck back into a shadow. They pass me so close I coulda touched them, see. But it was dark and I don't get no chance to make Dar bird with Dar gink. Well, they go up toward Spring Street and I trail them far enough to see them get in a bus, see. What did this fellow with the gink look like?" asked John, quickly. "I'm tellin' ya I didn't get no chance to make him," said Murphy. "All I'm able to get is that he's tall and black-haired, see. What kind of a hat did he wear?" "Straw." "It's Gibson, all right," snapped Brennan. John's nerves tingled throughout his body. A picture of Gibson as he was when he first saw him flashed into his mind. He saw the commissioner's perfectly molded hair, black and shiny, he saw his neat straw hat in his lap. "That's what I figured," said Murphy. "So last night I find a place near Dar door I seen them go in and waits for them, see. I wait all night, but nobody shows up. I figures dat if it's Gibson meetin' Dar gink, you boys will want to be in on it, see. I know dat joint like it's my own, see." "We see, Murphy, perfectly," interposed Brennan. "So, I know there's a basement, see. While I'm waitin' I take a chance and work Dar lock on Dar basement door, see. It's a padlock and I cop it, see. This mornin' I get a friend to make a key for it, see. And this afternoon I slip it back where it belongs." "Murphy," said Brennan, "you're a wonder. Where's the key?" Murphy reached into his pocket and produced it. Brennan glanced at his watch. "What time was it when you saw Cummings and this other fellow?" he asked. "I figure it was between 12 and 1, replied Murphy. "Good," Brennan exclaimed. "It's 10:30 now. We'll get down there and get the lay of the land in that basement. They may go there again, tonight." They walked rapidly toward the alleyway where Murphy had recognized Gink Cummings when he met the man they suspected was Gibson. Spring Street was beginning to become deserted for the night. Little groups of men and women from the theaters waited at the corners for streetcars. A peanut and candy peddler pushed his cart wearily along the street, close to the curb, plodding his way home. The proprietor of an open front fruit stand struggled with the folding iron fence pulled across the entrance to his store for protection of his wares until morning. They turned into the alleyway in single file, Murphy leading, Brennan next and John acting as a voluntary rear guard. The narrow alley, like the bottom of a canyon with walls of brick, was darker than the streets. In the middle of the block Murphy seemed to disappear into the earth. Then Brennan dropped from sight. John was startled momentarily until he found that they had descended a steep stairway, covered with trash and old papers. Murphy unlocked the padlock and the door creaked inward on rusty hinges. They sidled through it, fearful that the squeaking might betray them. Inside it was pitch dark. John was unable to see the faces of Brennan and Murphy, although their elbows touched. "I'll wait here and keep a lookout," said Murphy. "Here's a torch and go easy with it." He handed Brennan an electric pocket torch. "Murphy, you're a wonder, see," said Brennan as he flashed on the light, pointing it to his feet as he moved slowly forward. A pungent odor of stale beer from empty kegs piled against the walls mingled with that damp smell peculiar to underground places. Cobwebs tickled their faces as they walked through the seldom-used path between the kegs and packing boxes. The small arc of light from the electric torch danced ahead of them as John and Brennan inspected their surroundings. At the end of the basement, for a length of 25 yards back from the wall under the street, they found a space cleared of the boxes and kegs. On one side was a broad, steep stairway leading up to a trapdoor in the floor above. They could hear the voices of men in the room over their heads and a scuffling of feet that told them the soft drink and lunch establishment, into which the old saloon had been converted, had not been closed down for the night. Their inspection completed, they returned to Murphy, standing guard at the doorway on the alley. After Murphy had snapped the padlock shut, they crawled up to the alley again and he led them to a space between two buildings less than 4 feet in width, into which they crowded themselves. "We can spot 'em from here when they go by, see?" Murphy explained. Chapter 19. Midnight. For more than an hour they had remained in their cramped hiding place, waiting. Brennan smoked innumerable cigarettes while they talked in whispers. A policeman had walked through the alley peering into the shadows and they had crouched breathless until he passed them. The noise of the city had quieted. Except for an occasional streetcar or passing automobile, a silence brooded over the downtown district. Stray cats appeared to rummage in battered cans and a huge rat darted between their legs. The cool of the night, Southern California's balm to aid sleep, knit up the revealed sleeve of care, chilled them. Murphy took frequent nips from a flask, which he offered generously to his companions each time before he put it to his mouth. Brennan told them stories of experiences in the Canadian Northwest and adventures in a comic opera, Revolution in Central America. Murphy supplied anecdotes of the ring, things he had seen and done as a second at boxing matches. John listened to them, enraptured. Somewhere a clock struck the half hour, and as the sound died away they heard quick footsteps approaching them. Murphy looked cautiously around the corner of the brick wall and brought himself back with a jerk. "It's them," he said, in a hoarse whisper. He stepped back to make room for John and Brennan at the narrow aperture looking out on the alley. 2 figures passed their hiding place, walking hurriedly. The taller of the two strode with a quick, easy step that John recognized. "That's Gibson," he said in a sharp whisper. "It certainly is," corroborated Brennan. "And it's the gink, with him." They watched the figures until they halted at the rear of the saloon. They saw Cummings reach in his pocket for the key and open the door while Gibson glanced up and down the alley. When they had disappeared into the building, Brennan stepped out into the alley, motioning to Murphy and John to follow him. Again in single file, with Murphy taking the lead from Brennan, they walked warily toward the saloon, holding close to the back walls of buildings so as not to be seen from either end of the alley. Murphy removed the padlock from the basement door and opened it with precautionary slowness to minimize the rasping of the rusty hinges. He closed it again when they had entered the impenetrable darkness of the basement. Led by Murphy, who held the flashlight, they went ahead on tiptoe until they reached a spot which they judged was directly beneath the little room in which they believed Cummings and Gibson were in surreptitious conference. There they strained their ears to catch the sound of voices above them. John's heart thumped against his ribs and he imagined his breathing sounded like a gust of wind. The floor of the room above was less than 3 feet above their heads. A chair scraped on the floor. Then they heard voices. Tense, holding their breath, they poised in utter silence, straining to distinguish what was being said by the two in the room above their heads. John felt a sinking sensation of disappointment as he realized it would be impossible for them to hear the conversation between the gink and Gibson from where they were listening. The voices that came down to them were jumbled, faint, indistinguishable. Once Gibson laughed. Again the two voices above them stopped suddenly as if the two conspirators had heard a warning sound. Brennan signaled to them a moment later, when the two voices were audible again, to leave. Murphy snapped the padlock on the door and they crept back to their hiding place between the two buildings. "There was no need for us to stay there any longer," said Brennan. "We couldn't hear a word. There's only one way to get what we want and that is to use a dictograph. We'll have to run a wire with an ear on it into that room, somehow. Do you think we can do it, Murphy?" "Sure thing," Murphy replied. "The sooner the better," said Brennan. "We'll try to get it in tomorrow night. With a dictograph we can get every word that's said. We can bring a shorthand reporter with us and get it down in black and white. In the meantime we'll wait here and see them when they come out." Shortly before 1 o'clock they heard footsteps that told them Gibson and Cummings were returning from their conference. Directly opposite the aperture between the two buildings, where they were hiding, the taller of the two figures stopped and striking a match held the flame, cupped in his two hands, to the end of a cigar. The light of the match flickered only for a second, but in that time John and Brennan saw Gibson's face clearly. Tossing the burned match to the ground, he quickened his steps until he was again at Cummings' side and they went from sight around the corner. "He couldn't have done it better if we had asked him to," commented Brennan, referring to the light Gibson had thrown on his face by lighting the match. "I wonder what he'd do if he knew that we were watching him as he did it." "Swallowed da stogie," Murphy suggested. "Tomorrow night, same time and place, 10 o'clock at 2nd and Spring," Brennan instructed Murphy before they separated. "I'll be there," agreed Murphy, walking from them. "Just a minute, Murphy," called Brennan, "you forgot something." Murphy halted. "What?" he asked. "You forgot to put a C on the end of I'll be there." Murphy grinned, waved his hand and went his way. The next morning, after only a few hours' sleep, John and Brennan told PQ and the chief of their discovery. Brennan's plan for the use of the dictograph was approved and they were commended for their enterprise. "If you put this over," the city editor told John, "I'll double your salary." It was PQ who suggested that Benton, the photographer, accompany them and endeavor to obtain a picture of Cummings and Gibson together. "That would cinch it," he said. "If we could print a picture of Gibson and the gink, it would be irrefutable proof of the conspiracy." "It would be risky business, might spoil everything," Brennan remonstrated. "Could it be done this way?" said PQ. "While you and Gallant are in the basement with Murphy and a shorthand man, Benton can fix himself outside the door so that when Gibson and Cummings come out he can shoot a flashlight. He can have an automobile close and make a quick getaway by jumping into it. When you have enough of the conversation between Gibson and the gink, you can come outside, tip Benton to be ready and wait for him in the machine. They can't chase you. By the time they get a machine you should be a mile away from them." "All right, PQ, we'll try it that way," agreed Brennan. "Benton had better be with us tonight. Whose automobile shall we use and who'll drive it? It must be someone we can trust." "You can arrange that to suit yourselves," said PQ. "Don't be afraid to spend money," said the publisher. "It's a big thing you're going to do, boys, and I won't forget you, whether you succeed or not." That afternoon they obtained the dictograph. It was loaned them by Hubert Kittle, aviator, former police officer, one-time contender for the heavyweight pugilistic championship of the Navy, daredevil and adventurer. Later in the day Ben Smith, official court reporter and one of the fastest and most accurate shorthand men in the country, agreed to share in their adventure. "I'd trust Ben with my life," Brennan remarked to John later. "If there ever was a man who knew how to keep his mouth shut, it's Ben. Whenever the district attorney's office or the police or the sheriff have something really big, something that must be kept absolutely secret, they call him in and he never has failed them." "What about the machine and the driver?" John asked. "That's what has me stumped," Brennan admitted. "Most all of the taxi drivers are lined up with the gink, in some way or another. We must have someone we can not only rely upon, but who can drive. Believe me, Gallant, we can't afford to take any chances." From Ben Smith's office in the Hall of Justice building they went to the City Hall to break the news of their discovery of the meeting place of Gibson and Cummings to the mayor. While Brennan was telling the story and describing how they had planned to obtain a written report of the conversation between Gibson and the gink, by use of the dictograph, the mayor sat perched on the edge of his chair, his eyes gleaming with pent-up excitement. When Brennan had finished he bounced up and circled the desk with quick strides to shake them both by the hand. "You've done it, boys, you've done it," he said. Then he turned his face from him and drew a handkerchief from his pocket. "Don't mind me," he said, dabbing with the handkerchief at his eyes. "I'm an old fool, but I've been under a terrible strain, boys, these last few weeks, and what you told me was almost too good to be true." He turned to face him as quickly as he had turned away, and he was smiling. "What about tonight?" he asked. "Is there any way I can help you? Are you all fixed?" "All we need is a fast machine and a good driver," said Brennan. "Someone we can trust and rely upon. Can you suggest anyone?" "I certainly can," said the mayor. "Who?" The mayor's face brightened. "The mayor of Los Angeles," he said. "You mean?" "I mean it," assured the mayor. "I have the fastest car that can be bought and I'm not afraid to step on it. What more do you want?" "It's a go," exclaimed Brennan, and they shook hands all around. John long remembered the meeting between the mayor and Murphy when they assembled at 2nd and Spring Streets that night at 10 o'clock. Oddly, it was the mayor who was flustered when the two were introduced by Brennan, probably because he felt he owed so much to the scrawny youth who stood before him. "Murphy, my boy, I don't know how to thank you," the mayor began, and then, fearing that sounded too stiff and formal, he added, "If I'm re-elected it will be largely because of what you've done and you can have the best job I've got to offer. I got my own reasons for doing what I've done, see?" said Murphy, "but I'll take you up on that job offer of yours if we come through all right, see?" You're all right, Murphy," returned the mayor. They sat in the mayor's automobile while Brennan outlined the detailed plans for their expedition. "When they close up for the night, Murphy, Gallant and I will go in and rig up the dictograph," he said. "Ben, you might as well come along with us. It would be taking too much of a chance for one of us to go out and get you. Mr. Mayor, you'll park your car close to the alley and wait with Benton until one of us comes out. Then you'll drive to within a few yards of the rear door of the saloon and keep your motor going, while Benton sets up his camera. When we have enough of their conversation we'll come out and get in the car with you. One of us will stand by Benton, I'll do it, until he shoots his flash as Cummings and Gibson come out. Benton and I will run for the machine, and as soon as we hop on the running board, Mr. Mayor, you start going. Don't stop for anything and remember to turn your lights off while you're waiting. Now, does everyone understand?" Each signified that he knew his part. "One slip will ruin everything," Brennan warned them. "It's our one chance and a mistake will be costly. If something happens and the mayor's car stalls, Gallant and I will stay behind to handle the gink, and Gibson and the rest of you beat it. You, too, Murphy, do you understand? Gallant and I can take care of ourselves." They waited until after 11 o'clock before they left the corner of 2nd and Spring in the mayor's car. It was Saturday night and there were twice as many people on the streets at that hour than during the weekdays. As their paper published no Sunday edition, John and Brennan realized that if they were successful the exposure of the Gibson-Cummings plot could not be made until Monday or Tuesday at the earliest, which would be 3 or 4 days before the primary election, scheduled for Thursday. At Brennan's order the mayor drove the automobile up and down Spring Street, from 2nd to 8th and back. Each trip as they passed the saloon they watched for signs of it being closed for the night. At 11:30 they saw that the lights were extinguished, the doors closed and the steel lattice work drawn across the open front to protect the cigar stand for the night. The mayor swung the automobile into the 1st Street intersecting Spring Street, toward Main, stopping it at Brennan's instructions so that it could be driven into the alley without difficulty. Brennan, Smith, Murphy and John left the machine and hurried into the alley. Murphy carried a brace and bit hidden under his coat. John's left arm was stiff at his side from a steel bar thrust up into the sleeve, and Brennan carried the dictograph in a paper package under his arm. Holding close to the shadows of the brick wall, they walked rapidly to the basement door, opening it and entering quickly. Murphy and Smith were posted at the door to act as guard and to watch for the arrival of Gibson and Cummings. Brennan and John went directly to the trapdoor at the top of the stairs at the front of the basement. Brennan pushed upward against the door, but it held fast against his strength. John handed him the steel bar. A thrust, a wrench, a tearing of decayed wood and the door yielded. They scrambled through to the floor of the saloon, finding themselves within a few feet of the room where they were to plant the dictograph. "Luck is with us this time," said Brennan as they saw that the door of the room was open. He knelt in the open space between the tiers of drawers on either side of the desk that filled one side of the room. In half a minute the brace was boring into the wood of the flooring. Through the hole cut through the floor Brennan pushed the wires of the dictograph until their entire length disappeared into the basement and the ear of the eavesdropping device was flat over the perforation. He swept up the shavings from the boring of the hole with his hands as they hurried back down into the basement, where they found the end of the wire dangling from the ceiling. Brennan assembled the dictograph rapidly, attaching to it 3 headpieces with receivers clamping over the ears. "We'll test it," he said to John. "Scoot upstairs and say something in a natural tone in all parts of the room. Try to talk at about the pitch you believe they will speak and drop your voice to a whisper occasionally. Ben and I will listen." While Brennan and Smith waited with the headgears, John followed orders, returning to the basement when he believed he had talked to himself long enough to make the test accurate. "Works perfectly," Brennan told him. "Heard every word you said. We're all set and ready to go." John glanced at his watch. It was 5 minutes after 12. They made themselves as comfortable as possible on the empty packing boxes. Smith produced his notebooks and a handful of carefully sharpened pencils. A picture of Consuelo as she appeared when she stood beside the window with its red geraniums, reciting the verse in which she found heart comfort, flashed into John's mind. He closed his eyes to hold the vision in his imagination. It faded away, and another picture took its place, a mental miniature of Consuelo as he had last seen her, standing in the doorway, silhouetted in the soft rose light behind her. He saw her hand flutter and the door close. Could it be that with the intuition of a daughter of Eve she knew that he loved her? Could it be that she... "Brennan," he said, "what is that verse of Kipling's that starts so long as 'neath the hills or something like that?" In the tiny glow of Brennan's cigarette John noticed a hint of a smile on the other's lips as he recited. So long as 'neath the Kalka hills the Tonga horn shall ring, so long as down the Solon dip the hard-held ponies swing, so long as Tara Divi sees the lights of Simla town, so long as pleasure calls us up, and duty drives us down, if you love me as I love you. What pair so happy as we two? He paused. That's it, John said. There's another part of it that says something about all earth being servant. How does it go? Brennan continued. By all that lights our daily life or works our lifelong woe, from Boilergunge to Simla Downs and those grim glades below, where, heedless of the flying hoof and clamour overhead, sleep, with the grey languor for guard, our very scornful dead. If you love me as I love you, all earth is servant to us too. He paused again. That's it, said John. That's a hell of a thing to be thinking about now, said Brennan. I know it, John returned. For several minutes they were silent. John thought he saw Brennan give Smith a significant glance. By the way, Gallant, Brennan asked, how is your friend, Consuelo? I'm to have dinner with her and Gibson the night he is elected mayor, John replied, remembering Gibson's invitation. Who arranged that? Asked Brennan. Gibson. I'm afraid we're going to spoil your little dinner party, said Brennan, smiling. That verse you just recited for me doesn't rhyme if you make it 3, instead of 2, John countered. You win, conceded Brennan. What time is it getting to be? John looked at his watch. 1:45, he answered. What if they don't show? A shaft of light shot through the darkness from the door. It was the prearranged signal from Murphy to inform them that Gibson and Cummings were approaching. As if jerked by cords held in a single hand they straightened up from their lounging positions. They heard the door open at the rear above them and footsteps on the floor, approaching until the noise was directly over their heads. Dust shook down on them from the grimy ceiling. Simultaneously they pulled on their headgears and listened. Chapter 20. As clearly and distinctly as though he was at a telephone John heard the voices of Gink, Cummings and Gibson in the room above him. Smith began writing his shorthand record of the conversation they overheard as soon as the conspirators began talking. Well, what's new? He heard a voice he knew to be Cummings ask. Things are about the same, he heard Gibson reply. I can't see how anything can happen now to beat us. The newspapers are the only thing that worry me, said Cummings. Those damn reporters are never satisfied. They keep digging around until they stumble across something and then tear things to pieces. What about them? You haven't heard of any one of them asking too many questions or getting suspicious, have you? Gibson laughed. Forget it, Cummings, he said. I'll handle the reporters. They're not half as smart as they think they are and as people give them credit for being. In the glare from the electric torch that Brennan focused on Smith's notebook John saw Brennan wink at him. Why, 2 of them, Brennan and Gallant, are my best friends, Gibson continued. They've fallen for every stunt we've pulled. Brennan winked again. Don't be so cocksure, Cummings cautioned. I've had more experience with them than you have and you're all wrong if you think they're a bunch of dumbbells. You'll have to be mighty careful. You've sailed right along without any trouble because you've had sound advice. As soon as you think you're out of danger, that's the time something's sure to happen. I'll admit you've steered me straighter than I could have gone alone, said Gibson, but don't worry, I'm going to take good care of myself. There was a silence of a minute. John pictured Gibson and the Gink regarding each other critically through the smoke of their cigarette and cigar. It was Cummings who spoke first. Gibson, he said, this will be our last meeting before the election. Why, I've decided we can't take any more chances, said Cummings. Another pause in the conversation. Then, Gibson, do we understand each other thoroughly? What makes you ask that? John believed he detected a note of surprise in Gibson's counter-question. I want to be sure, that's all, Cummings said. You know how much I'm relying on you. You know what I've done to put you where you are. You're only going to be mayor for 1 term and we'll have to clean up enough then to last us the rest of our lives. When your term expires, I want to quit the game. You were broke when I met you and I've made you mayor of Los Angeles. You have power and a reputation, and if you don't spill the beans you'll be a millionaire when you walk out of the city hall in 4 years. For 10 years I've had this plan in my mind, waiting for a chance to work it. When I met you I knew I had the man to go through with it. I've spent a lot of money, risked everything I had, and there have been times that I've had a fight on my hands to keep the boys in line. It looks now as if I'm going to come out on top. While you're mayor we'll work carefully. Probably it will be a year before we start out after the money. We can afford to wait that long once you're in office. But everything, you understand, depends on you. Everything you say is true, said Gibson, seriously. A pause. When Cummings broke the silence there was a new tone in his voice. It was harsh, dictatorial, threatening, the voice of a man of steel who ruled like an uncrowned king by the fear he instilled in his miserable subjects. Gibson, he said, if you double-cross me you'll wish you had never been born. John could not help but admire the even coolness of Gibson's voice when he replied, there's no need for you to try to frighten me, Cummings. I mean what I say, returned the gink. I know you do, said Gibson quietly. But I want you to understand something. You and I can get along together without any threats. And another thing, I'm not working with you because I fear you, but because I want what you're giving me. So forget the rough stuff, as you call it. So delicately was the dictograph adjusted that John heard Cummings draw his breath sharply. I've been double-crossed before, he said, by men a damn sight smarter than you are. I'll simply repeat what I just said to you, retorted Gibson. I'm working with you because I want what you have to give me, not because I'm afraid of you or anyone else. It was a direct challenge to a man who ruled by cowing his adherents, who had never failed to carry out a threat, and who was as guilty of murder as the thugs he ordered to beat or shoot to death a rebel in the ranks of crime. But between the two, Cummings was the coward, psychologically at least. His shrewdness told him that it was useless for him to endeavor to control Gibson by threats of physical harm or death, and he exercised his tact. He realized also that a man of Gibson's mettle was more to be trusted than a servile, affrighted weakling. You're right, Gibson, he said. There's no need for either of us to try to frighten the other. Forget what I said a minute ago. I said it without thinking. You can't blame me if my nerves are on edge after what I've been through to put you where you are, and you know how much I've got at stake in this business. No more than I have, said Gibson. Cummings, I've never told you this because I didn't think it necessary, but on the day I am sworn in as mayor I hope to be married. You can understand better now how well I realize that nothing must happen. I'd rather die right here than have any of this business come out to disgrace her. Cummings received Gibson's announcement of his intention to be married in silence. John expected Brennan to tip him another wink or smile to him at Gibson's mention of his marriage plans. Instead, he saw Brennan's eyes narrow and his jaw set. Whether the expression of anger and determination that came over Brennan's face was caused by indignation at Gibson's duplicity or by friendship for Consuelo, whom Brennan had never seen, John did not know, but a thrill of encouragement swept through him as he realized that he was not alone in the fight to save her. He saw Brennan signal him to approach. Slipping off the headgear he moved noiselessly and leaned forward so that he could hear what Brennan whispered to him. It won't be long now before they'll be leaving, Brennan said. Slip out without making any noise and bring Benton and the mayor for the picture. John went quickly to the door, where Murphy was on guard. Everything okay? Asked Murphy in a hoarse whisper. John nodded and went up and out into the alley. He found the mayor and Benton waiting nervously in the automobile. We've got enough to ruin them, he said, anticipating the mayor's eagerness. He climbed into the car and the mayor drove it quietly into the alley, switching off the lights as Brennan had ordered him to do. He stopped the automobile about 30 feet past the door of the saloon. In a minute Benton was setting up his camera on its tripod directly across the alley from the door. At Benton's request, John stood at the door and flashed on his electric torch long enough for the photographer to get the focus. Although it was less than 5 seconds that he stood with his back only a foot from the door from which Cummings and Gibson were to emerge, John's imagination created a terrible fear that they would come upon him in the helpless position in which he stood. All set, Benton called to him in a sharp whisper. Crossing the alley he saw Benton filling his flashlight gun with flash powder and heard him chanting, softly to himself. "E would dodden, carry one till the longest day was done," and he didn't seem to know the use of fear. "If we charged or broke or cut, you could bet your bloomin' nut, Ed be waitin' 50 paces right flank rear." He was at Benton's side when Murphy, Smith and Brennan, in rapid succession came quickly up into the alley from the basement stair. Sharply Brennan ordered John to follow Murphy and Smith into the automobile while he remained with Benton, who stood poised with his finger on the trigger of the flash gun. As soon as John, with Murphy and Smith, was in the automobile, he looked back. The door opened and Cummings and Gibson stepped out. Benton's flashlight gun boomed and a brilliant white light blazed, turning night into day for a fraction of a second. The mayor raced the motor as Benton and Brennan dashed toward the automobile and sprang to the running board. John saw Gibson and Cummings, recovering from their surprise, rush after them. Cummings was tugging at something in his right hip pocket. With a roar from its exhaust, the automobile lunged forward. He heard the mayor curse as he shifted the gears fiercely, each move of his hand giving the car accelerated speed. "Duck your heads," Brennan yelled. An automatic pistol cracked out its sharp reports and a bullet tore through the top of the car and shattered the windshield glass to splinters as the automobile lurched out of the alley. Murphy sat tilted back in a chair, his feet braced against the sill of the only window of his room. Cigarette butts were heaped in a tarnished brass souvenir ashtray on a table at his side. The Sunday newspapers, from which he had extracted the sporting sections to peruse every line, were scattered on the floor around his chair. His scraggy hair tousled on his head, a growth of black, wiry beard covering his face, coatless and collarless, he was a picture of coarse self-indulgence. Returning to his room at 3 o'clock in the morning after separating from the mayor, Brennan, John and Smith following their escape from Gink Cummings' pistol shots, he had slept until noon. He went to the cheap dairy lunch near his rooming house for a heavy breakfast of ham and eggs, purchased the Sunday papers and came back to smoke and read. The room with its disordered bed, drab walls dotted with sporting prints, dusty, rickety furnishings, threadbare carpet and grimy lace curtains, was a dreary, prison-like place. But to Murphy it was the place of his content, as much of a home as he had ever had. He had slept in alleys and deserted shacks and basements. So to him the room brought no discomfort and was as luxurious in his unimaginative mind as a suite at the Ambassador or the Alexandria. No invitation to the restful mountains or the sparkling ocean, its beaches lined with gay Sunday crowds, floated to him on the breeze that drifted in through the open window. He was enjoying a roustabout's day of rest. After a while, perhaps, when dusk falling over the city heralded brooding night, he would emerge from his room to visit his favorite pool room, where, in an atmosphere blue with smoke, he would lounge in a chair at a wall and exchange gossip of sport and sporting things with other Hangerson. From there he might wander in upon a friendly crap or card game behind the locked door of an unventilated room of a Spring Street social club. Or he might go to one of the stuffy, overheated gymnasiums to watch some industrious and ambitious boxer in training. That was his life and he was happy in it, a hand-to-mouth sort of existence in which he was satisfied. At intervals a thrill of the excitement of the adventure of the night before, when he had played an important part in the trapping of Gink, Cummings and Gibson, returned to him. It was difficult for him to realize that the mayor of Los Angeles had taken him by the hand, like a brother, and thanked him and promised him the best job at his disposal if he was re-elected. He remembered having told the mayor he could drive like Jimmy Murphy, the racer, when they had sped out of the downtown district and away from possible pursuit. He remembered how he had patched a cut over the mayor's eye, a laceration caused by a piece of the shattered windshield, with the skill of facial repair that he had learned as a second at the Vernon Ring. The gallant kid, and Brennan, they were regular guys, all right. Brennan was a wisecracker, all right, all right. Some day he'd tell them why he was helping them. They thought he was doing it for the money they gave him. He wouldn't double-cross the Gink, or anyone else for money, see. What kind of a bird did they take him for, anyway? A stool pigeon. He'd tell them why someday and they'd know that Tim Murphy wasn't no stool pigeon. He'd tell them. A rap on the door. He brought his feet down from the window sill. The gallant kid, or Brennan, probably, or, maybe it was his friend, the mayor. He rose and, crossing the room, turned the key in the lock. He was about to put his hand on the knob when the door pushed open toward him and 3 men sidled into the room. Murphy cringed back as one of them shut the door quickly, locked it and turned to face him, putting the key in his pocket. It was Slim Gray, the Gink's right-hand man. Slim Gray, cold-eyed, his thin lips pressed tight together, Slim Gray, hard, venomous, merciless, hate blazing in his eyes. And the other 2 looking at him contemptuously, snarlingly. 2 of the Gink's men. For nearly a minute they stood there looking at him, without moving. For nearly a minute he stared back at them as if they had hypnotized him, his arms half lifted, his head bent forward, his mouth hanging open. A sickening feeling of terror caused his hands to tremble and his knees to feel as though they were giving way under him. He knew they were going to bash him, probably kill him. He might have been able to handle Slim alone, but those two powerful bruisers, they'd kill him, sure. He checked an impulse to scream. They'd throttle him if he did. Maybe he could talk himself out of the trap. Twice before he managed to gasp out, Slim. His lips formed the word, but no sound came from them. "Shut your mouth," said Slim, through his teeth. He threw himself back as though he expected the words to be followed by a rain of blows. His back was flat against the wall. If he could only get around to the window he could dart out and down the fire escape. Divining his one and only hope of escape, one of the bashers sprang forward, grabbed him by an arm and whirled him into a chair. He cringed as the bruiser stood over him, his big fists clenched and ready to strike. "Get back, Louis," he heard Slim order sharply. Louis stepped away from him and Slim faced him. "Murphy," said Slim, speaking slowly, "you've got one chance to get out of this." "What have I done, Slim?" His voice shook. In his terror he could only think of trying to stall. "Don't pull that stuff on me, you damn stool pigeon," snapped Slim. "You know what I want from you. Who was that with you last night? Come on, spit it out." "What are ya talking about, Slim? I told you not to pull that stuff. It won't get you anything, see? We know you were in it. You fool, didn't you know we'd find out about you?" "Ah, Slim, ya got me wrong, I ain't." A hand clutched his hair. He could feel the fingernails digging into his scalp. With a jerk that shook him to his feet, Louis threw him half out of the chair. "Cut it, Louis," he heard Slim say as he remained where he had been thrown, fearful of lifting his head. For a minute there was a dreadful silence. "Murphy," said Slim, "do you remember what happened to Gat, Mollwitz and Beanie Wilson?" Did he remember? A nauseating feeling gripped him. Gat and Beanie had defied the Gink, and they were found one morning beaten and kicked, broken and bleeding. They died in agony a few hours later. "Don't, Slim, don't," he gasped. "Out with it, then. Who was that with you last night? Come through and you can get out of town tonight." Right then something happened inside of Murphy, something a psychologist might be able to describe in vague scientific terms. He became possessed of a desperate courage far greater than he had ever dreamed of having. In that moment of metamorphosis he became a fatalist. He realized that whether he gave Slim the information he sought or not, the result would be the same. The life would be kicked and beaten out of him. The Gink, to save himself and Gibson at all hazards, would not take a further chance by permitting him to live. Then why should he give up? Why should he surrender to Slim and his bashers if he could gain nothing by it? He'd like to be able to live just long enough to tell the mayor and Brennan and the gallant kid the real reason that he helped him trap Cummings and Gibson. He didn't want them to think he had sold himself for money. And even if they killed him now, Brennan and the gallant kid would know that he died trying to protect them, that he wasn't a contemptible squealer after all. As he straightened up from the prone position into which he had been thrown by Louis, he saw, out of the corner of his eye, the pillow under his bed, and there flashed into his mind the realization that under it was his revolver. If he could only get it somehow. "Let's hear it. Who was with you?" demanded Slim. Murphy's long dormant imagination began to work. For the purpose of deceiving Slim, he must keep a mask of servile fear on his face. "Let me get a shot of Hooch, Slim, and I'll tell ya everything," he whimpered. He rose timidly from his chair. Louis and the other basher started toward him, but stopped at a gesture from Slim. He went to the battered, flat-top dresser a few feet from the bed and pulled open a drawer. From it he took a bottle of whiskey. Pretending that the cork was stuck, he worked with it fumblingly to get time in which to think. He would take a drink, feign that it choked him, stagger to the head of the bed, stumble onto the pillow, and then come up with the revolver in his hand. Then he would have them. He lifted the bottle to his mouth and gulped. He let the bottle fall from his hand as he choked and gasped for breath, sputtering the fiery liquor from his lips. Reeling and spitting, he stumbled toward the bed and fell on it. His right hand pushed under the pillow and seized the gun, but not by the handle. In the second that he was trying desperately to wrap his hand around the butt of the weapon and get a finger on the trigger, he was lost. With a warning shout, Louis leaped on the bed and grasped his arm. He felt himself pulled to his feet and hurled to the floor. He shut his eyes. With a sweep of his arm, the basher crashed a blackjack against his skull. A head-splitting flash of blinding light and then darkness and insensibility. He did not feel the brutal blows that were rained on him nor the kicks that fractured his arms, his ribs and tore deep cuts on his face and body. "That's enough, boys, beat it," commanded Slim. As they ran out of the room, Slim caught sight of Murphy's coat. Quickly his hands went through the pockets. From one he drew a soiled bit of paper. On the paper was written, "Brennan and the Gallant Kid," and the telephone number of the newspaper on which they were employed. Slim locked the door from the outside and tossed the key back into the room over the transom, leaving Murphy for dead. Chapter 21. In that delightful state of drowsiness that follows after waking from a sound sleep, John mentally reviewed the stirring adventure of the night before. The warm, bright sunshine streaming in through the open windows of his bedroom had wakened him slowly. He could hear his mother in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. Every detail of how the mayor, Murphy, Brennan and he had succeeded in overhearing a conversation between Gibson and Gink Cummings was fresh in his mind. His nerves tingled as he again felt the thrill of those breathless minutes when Benton photographed Gibson and the Gink by flashlight and Cummings rained shots after them as they escaped in the mayor's automobile. It was only a matter of a few hours now before the conspiracy between the police commissioner and candidate for mayor and the notorious king of the underworld to seize control of the city government would be exposed, broadcast throughout Los Angeles as the most sensational news story of the year. Before he returned home, after 3 o'clock in the morning, John, with Brennan, had informed PQ of their success in obtaining evidence to prove the Cummings-Gibson conspiracy. The city editor told them he would communicate with the chief Sunday and instructed them to report for duty earlier than usual Monday morning. "We'll probably break the story Monday," said PQ. "We'll shoot everything we have. Gallant's story of the framed raid on the Spring Street bookmakers. How the Gink regulated crime to give Gibson a reputation. The affidavits of Big Jim, Hatch and his wife and give it the finishing touch with Benton's photograph. Of course, we'll have Smith's verbatim report. Arrange with him to have it ready for us without fail by 7 o'clock Monday morning. One of you get an affidavit from Murphy, telling his whole story. You've blown the lid off things this time, all right, boys." Murphy left them before they telephoned to PQ, so it was impossible for them to arrange with him to meet one of them before Monday. They agreed that John should find Murphy and obtain his affidavit in order that it would be ready for publication Monday. The elation John felt as a newspaper reporter in having aided in obtaining the evidence for the exposure of the Cummings-Gibson plot changed to regret when he thought of how it would affect Consuelo. Would she remember and follow out her promise to think of him as having done what he believed was his duty? Would she refuse to believe the truth about Gibson, or would she, in the bitterness of disillusionment, blame those who brought about the exposure? He pictured her beside her window of red geraniums, lifting tear-dimmed eyes to her green and friendly hill, and he was unhappy in conjecturing upon her broken heart. His mother's call to him that breakfast was waiting roused him from his reverie. He had never told Mrs. Gallant that Consuelo was Gibson's fiancée. In fact, Consuelo's name had never been mentioned between them since the night that Mrs. Gallant had displayed her antipathy for her. He realized also that his mother would not be able to comprehend why Consuelo met him in Gibson's absence and would probably consider it an unforgivable breach of etiquette. At breakfast he told his mother of his adventure of the previous night, minimizing the dangers of the exploit to forestall her inevitable admonition for him to avoid risks of all kinds. "It's a big thing for me," he said, enthusiastically. "I was promised more salary and a contract if it went through. Of course, Brennan and PQ and Murphy deserve most of the credit, but I helped them." "What will become of this man Gibson?" Mrs. Gallant asked. "I've been wondering how he'll take it," he said. "He may try to bluff through, claim it's all a perjured frame-up. But I don't believe he'll do that. You see, he knows that the photograph is absolutely condemning evidence. I expect that he'll simply disappear. He may have left the city by this time. Or he may try to bargain with our publisher by offering to retire as a candidate if the scandal about him is hushed up. I don't believe the chief would consent to that, though." Usually on Sunday mornings John accompanied his mother to church. This day, however, because it was too late for them to attend the morning service, they went for a walk instead. When they passed the neighborhood motion picture theater, John noticed that Consuelo's latest picture, the one he had seen at the preview, was being shown. An heroic-size photograph of Consuelo stood in the small lobby of the theater. He noticed that his mother averted her eyes. They walked in silence for half a block and then Mrs. Gallant spoke. Isn't Miss Carrillo a friend, a very dear friend, of this Mr. Gibson? She asked. Yes, he admitted. Why do you ask, Mother? She did not reply. But, Mother, he exclaimed, surely you won't think that she knew of his scheming with Gink Cummings. Will you blame her because someone she knew went wrong? Do you hold her responsible for the faults and weaknesses of others? Again Mrs. Gallant did not reply. Her silence provoked him. It was so unlike her to be unfair. He stifled the angry protest he was about to utter. Some day, Mother, you are going to know her, he said. Then every unkind thought you have ever held toward her will come back to you in anguish. You know, Mother, dearest, how wrong it is to condemn unfairly. That was one of the first lessons taught me by Father, to withhold judgment, suppress prejudice until all sides of a case have been heard. That is the keystone of American liberty, malice toward none. It was the principle of the Magna Carta, Great Britain's document of human rights, that the English barons compelled their king to deliver to them more than 700 years ago. Remember, Mother, dearest, his voice softened, it was prejudice, intolerance and hate that caused the crucifixion of Christ. John, please, his mother said, gently, please don't allow anything to spoil our one day of the week together. But, Mother, he began. My boy, please, she pleaded. He had never gone against her wishes when she spoke to him like that. He patted her arm and smiled. All right, Mother, dearest, he said, we'll forget all about it now. This is our day together and nothing shall impair it. How glad he would have been able to have told her of his love for Consuelo. How much help she could have been to him, now that he was about to ruin the man Consuelo had agreed to take as her husband. If that Mrs. Sprocket, who was fostering his mother's prejudice against motion pictures and motion picture players, would only stay more at home with her colicky baby instead of playing the part of a hypocritical Puritan. A passage from Proverbs his father had often quoted returned to him. Where no wood is there the fire goeth out, so where there is no talebearer, the strife ceaseth. But he chased these thoughts from his head to be a companion to his mother. They admired flowers in gardens of homes they passed, studied interesting architecture they caught sight of, planned a picnic in the foothills. John thought of the spot where he had watched Consuelo before the cameras, recited bits of poetry to each other and enjoyed the afternoon more than any since the death of Mr. Gallant, who had always led them on their Sunday tramps, as he called them. It was earlier than usual when they returned to their home. They shortened their outing because of John's promise to Brennan to see Murphy before morning and obtain from him an affidavit to be used in the printed exposure of Cummings and Gibson. Be careful, my boy, Mrs. Gallant cautioned him as he kissed her before leaving to get the car to go downtown. Don't worry, Mother, there's no danger now, he assured her. As he passed the neighborhood picture theater, a young girl, 16 or 17 years of age, emerged from the door. In the strong light of the lobby he saw her face plainly, a rather pretty face, and he remembered, indistinctly, of having met her, seen her somewhere before. He saw that she recognized him with a startled expression and unconsciously he slowed his steps. The girl hurried to his side and put her hand on his arm. Please don't tell, will you? She begged. Tell, I don't understand, he said. Aren't you John Gallant? She asked. He noticed a look of fear in her eyes. Yes. I'm Elmer Sprocket, she said, as if the mention of her name was sufficient explanation of her request for him to keep whatever she had in mind a secret. Well, he asked, still unable to understand. If Mother ever found out that I was at the picture show today I'd be in a peck of trouble, she said. She won't let me go to the movies at all and I have to sneak away and I do enjoy them so much. Now you won't tell your mother or my mother or anyone, will you? Of course not, he answered, smiling. Oh, thanks ever and ever so much, she said, and turning, hurried homeward. That was it, he thought as he waited for his car. Mrs. Sprocket could find time to run around the neighborhood telling others what to do, what not to do, what should be done and what shouldn't be done, but she couldn't be obeyed even by her own daughter. All the way uptown and until he turned into the narrow, foul-aired stairway leading up to Murphy's room, Mrs. Sprocket and Elmer, his mother and Consuelo were jumbled in his thoughts. He rapped on the panel of the door of Murphy's room at the end of the dark, dingy hall. When he received no response he turned the knob and pushed against the door, which held fast. Discovering that it was locked he hesitated a moment to decide whether to wait or leave and return later. A moan, a deep gasping sound, came to his ears. He started and put his ear to the crack of the door. Another moan, fainter than before, sounded in the room. Murphy, he called. There was no answer from beyond the door, not even a moan. John shook the handle. "Murphy, Murphy, is that you? Are you hurt?" he shouted. No answer, no sound. He put his shoulder to the door and, bracing himself, pushed with all his strength against it, but it held firm. Stepping back, he swung a kick against a lower panel. The wood broke and splintered. He dropped to his knees and tore the split pieces out with his hands. Through the hole in the panel he saw the key, slim, Gray had tossed back into the room over the transom. Reaching his arm through the opening, he picked it up and, opening the door, rushed into the room. The twisted, broken, beaten figure of Murphy lay on the floor near the foot of the bed. The awfulness of the sight turned John sick, and with a choking cry of pity and despair he dropped to his knees beside it. "Murphy, Murphy," he cried, "what have they done to you? Can you hear me? Speak to me, Murphy, speak to me." The head of the bashed youth rolled limply from side to side and he groaned unconsciously. John shut his eyes to close from vision the swollen, lacerated face of his friend. Fury surged through him as he jumped to his feet. He knew intuitively that Murphy was the victim of Gink Cummings' brutality. He wanted to kill Cummings with his hands. Sobbing, he ran from the room and dashed to the nearest telephone. He called the receiving hospital, telling the attendant to rush the ambulance at top speed. He waited at the street entrance to the rooming house until the ambulance arrived, its shrill siren whistle clearing a pathway for it through the traffic. Slowly, gently, they lifted Murphy from the floor and, placing him on a stretcher, carried him down the stairs to the ambulance. A morbid crowd, attracted by the sight of the ambulance, thronged the sidewalk. John sat beside the stretcher with the white-clad attendant as the ambulance sped up 3rd Street to Hill and, turning to the right, stopped with a creaking of brakes in front of the hospital door. He waited anxiously for the surgeons to make their examination. 2 detectives hurried from Central Station to the hospital and, getting what information John had, dashed out to a waiting automobile. In his anxiety as he waited for the verdict of the surgeons, he only gave the detectives Murphy's name and the address of the rooming house. They were gone before he could tell them he knew Murphy had been bashed by the Ginks men. "He's in bad shape," the chief surgeon told him. "Skull fracture, arms, jaw, ribs and nose broken, internal injuries, cuts and bruises, lost a lot of blood." "What can be done to save him?" John asked. "An operation is about the only thing," the surgeon replied. "He's pretty far gone." "Operate then," said John. "Get the best surgeons in the city to help you. Spare no expense." An hour later Murphy was on the operating table with 3 of the most capable surgeons in Los Angeles, working with all their skill and science to hold the flickering life in his body. Not knowing where to find Brennan, John telephoned to PQ. "I'll get in touch with the mayor and have him tell Sweeney to put every available detective on the case," the city editor said. "Do everything you can for Murphy. Be careful yourself. If the Gink knows what Murphy has done, he knows that you and Brennan were with him. He'll not stop at anything. I'll try to find Brennan." While Murphy was in the operating room, Chief Sweeney, with a squad of detectives, appeared at the hospital and questioned John. "I've just talked with the mayor," Sweeney said. "He has told me enough of what has happened to convince me that the Ginks men did this. I'm going out now to arrest Cummings on suspicion and hold him in jail until we see how Murphy comes out. If he dies, I'll charge Cummings with murder if it's the last thing I do on earth." John noticed as Sweeney and the detectives hurried away that several of them carried sawed-off shotguns. A few minutes later they wheeled Murphy out of the operating room on a carrier and placed him on a cot in one of the wards. John approached one of the surgeons, swathed in sterilized clothes and apron. "Will he live, doctor?" he asked in trepidation. The surgeon answered without looking up from the rubber gloves he was peeling from his hands. "He has a chance," he said. "Much of a chance?" John asked. "Not much, I'm afraid," the surgeon said. "You see, he is weak from the loss of blood and he is hurt internally. His ribs have punctured his lungs. Only 1 in 100 injured the way he is ever recovers. We'll do everything we can now, but we're almost helpless." He went to Murphy's bedside. The figure stretched flat on the bed was motionless except for an almost indiscernible trembling of the covering that showed Murphy was still breathing. The face of the unconscious youth was hidden by bandages. A pungent odor of ether filled the room. As John looked down on the bed, praying that the little flame of life would not be extinguished by the cold breath of death, he became conscious of the fact that someone else had entered and was standing close behind him. Believing it to be a nurse, he turned slowly to ask if it was possible that Murphy might regain consciousness after the effects of the anesthetic wore off. He found himself facing the mayor. For fully a minute the mayor stood looking down at Murphy. Tears filled his eyes and brimmed over his cheeks. He let them fall unheeded as he lifted his eyes to John. "Gallant," he said, "if you don't mind, I'm going to pray for the life of this boy." John bowed his head. He saw the mayor drop to his knees at the side of the bed so that his forehead touched the covers. "Thy will be done, O Father," he heard the mayor pray, "but we ask thee in thy gentle mercy, to spare us the life of this boy. We ask thee to hold the life in his poor, battered body, to bring him back to us. We ask it, O Lord, in the name of thy Son, Amen." The mayor rose to his feet and they walked from the room. "I hope you'll tell the people of Los Angeles what Murphy saved them from," said the mayor as they separated outside the hospital door. "Whether I'm re-elected or not, I'll not rest until the brutes who beat him are brought to justice. You can tell them that, too." Dusk was deepening into night as John entered the detective bureau at Central Station, around the corner in First Street from the hospital. He found the two detectives who made the first investigation of the case writing out their reports. 3 men did it, one of them told him. They were seen entering and leaving the house. 2 big fellows and a small, thin-faced man. No one heard the noise or suspected that anything was wrong. "No identification of the men?" he asked. "Not yet," the detective replied. "We understand the chief and a bunch of the boys are on the case and may make an arrest before morning. By the way, if you're a friend of Murphy's, you'd better go down to his room and take charge of his things. There's no lock on the door now, you know, and things are liable to disappear." "Thanks for the tip," said John. "I'll attend to it." He went direct to Murphy's room from police headquarters. The room was dark and, scratching a match, he lighted the gas at a jet in the wall. He thought of how rapidly gas illumination in homes had disappeared. He remembered Consuelo's father telling him that as late as 1870 there was only one street lamp, a gas one, in Spring Street, although there was agitation among the citizens to have the city council add another light to put as far south as First Street. As he inspected the room in the pale light from the gas flame, he tried to picture in his mind how Murphy had tried to save himself from the 3 bruises. He discovered the stain caused by the spilled whiskey, the empty bottle under the bed. Then, suddenly, it flashed into his mind that Murphy might have been beaten to force him to reveal the names of those who were with him. He stopped his work of collecting Murphy's few belongings as this possibility came into his brain. Had Murphy told? Beaten and kicked and facing death, had he sought mercy by revealing who had the evidence against Cummings and Gibson? Or, had he passed into insensibility keeping it a secret? He heard footsteps approaching the room. Perhaps it was Sweeney and his detectives coming to inspect the scene of the brutal attack. It might be Brennan. The door swung open and 3 men entered the room quickly. John recognized one of them as Slim Gray. He knew he was face to face with the men who had got Murphy. Chapter 22. In the fraction of the second that he stood facing Slim Gray and the 2 bruisers, tense and glaring, the cool self-possession he had acquired in his training as a boxer overcame his mental confusion. With one quick glance he saw the cold hate gleaming in Slim's eyes as he stood with his back flat against the door and noticed that one of the bashers wore brass knuckles on his right fist, while the other had pulled a blackjack from his pocket. The iron bedstead was between him and the 2 thugs. As one of them started forward, John stooped and grasped the empty whiskey bottle on the floor at his feet. From his crouching position he leaped toward the window, his only avenue of escape. Louis, it was he who was armed with the blackjack, jumped at him with a curse, his skull-crashing weapon held back to strike a blow. Coolly, with the mental rapidity he had developed as a boxer, John darted toward the bruiser and back. Tricked by the feint, Louis lurched forward with a sweeping blow of the blackjack. The momentum of the swing of his arm drew his head down, and with a quick slashing movement, like a pugilist chopping with his fist, John crashed the bottle against Louis's temple. The bottle shattered and Louis, blood gushing from the wound, crumpled at his feet. John tossed away the neck of the bottle and barely had time to sidestep the onrush of the other thug, who struck viciously at him with the fist armored with the knuckles. As they drew back, John was in the position of a boxer, standing lightly on his toes, his left hand extended with the shoulder drawn up to protect his chin, which rested against his collarbone, his right arm crooked back. The bed was between him and the door, where Slim stood. The basher swung up from the hip with his right arm, aiming for John's face. A man who leads, or strikes first, with his right hand, is a target for a trained fighter. Warding off the blow by lifting his left arm so that it caught the descending fist on the tightened muscles below his elbow, John stepped in with a swift right cross to his opponent's chin. A sharp pain shot through his clenched fist and he knew he had smashed a knuckle as it crashed against the jawbone. His head jerking as he received John's punch, the thug reeled back, throwing up his hand to cover his face. John rushed at him and sank his bruised right fist into his middle. As the fist clouted against his abdomen, the bruiser grunted and, doubling over, grabbed John in his arms. John lifted his left arm as they clenched and pushed his elbow against the other's throat. Pulling himself out of the clinch as the Basher's hold weakened when the elbow pressed against his neck, John whirled and stopped with his back against the wall. He danced lightly from side to side to confuse the thug, who stood panting before him. Louis, only stunned by the blow with the bottle, pulled himself to his hands and knees. John saw that his face was smeared crimson from the cut on his head. Realizing that the Basher in front of him was stalling for time, waiting until Louis was on his feet again, John darted to one side and seized a chair, swinging it up over his shoulder. His hand with its broken knuckle was puffed and painful, and it hurt to bend the fingers to grasp the chair. Louis was on his feet, poised for a leap. John threw the chair at the Basher before him and dashed to the other side of the room. "I'll get him, Joe," Louis gasped, wiping the blood from his eyes and taking a firmer grip on the blackjack. As Louis rushed at him, John seized the heavy water pitcher on a table near him and hurled it. With a snarl on his lips, Louis ducked and the pitcher broke against the wall behind him. Louis was smarter than Joe had been. He led with his left hand, and as the blow was warded off, he swung the blackjack with his right. John jerked back his head, but the club grazed his cheek, tearing open the flesh. Before he could recover, Joe's brass knuckles crashed against his forehead, opening another cut. John wobbled to his feet. His brain was numbed and he was blinded by the blood from the laceration over his eyes. Feebly he lifted his arms to protect his head. Joe pulled his arms down from his face and Louis drew back his blackjack for the knockout blow. As he was about to strike, John, with the last flickering move of instinctive self-protection, sank to the floor. With a curse, Louis lifted his foot to kick the prone figure beneath him. John nerved himself for the blow that was to knock him insensible. He knew it was the end. He heard a scuffle of feet and dimly, through the blood from his wounds, he saw Louis and Joe step back from him. He shut his eyes. They were going to kick him to death. If he could only, but why didn't they move? Why didn't they kick him? What were they waiting for? Unable to believe his eyes, he saw the legs of Louis and Joe take backward steps until they were back against the wall. Did they think he was out? Were they leaving him for dead? Fascinated, he stared at the legs of the bruisers, and then he heard a voice he recognized. "Keep him up," the voice commanded, coldly, evenly, "keep him up. The first one of you that tries moving gets it, understand?" Slowly John lifted his head. It ached splittingly and lolled heavily on his shoulders. Weakly he pressed his hand against his cut forehead, stopping the blood from dripping over his eyes. Blinking to clear his vision, he looked around the room. In the doorway stood Brennan, a .45 caliber Army model automatic in his hand, a very different Brennan from the reporter John knew. A Brennan with eyes as cold as the steel of the gun he gripped, a Brennan with an unwavering hand and a steady voice, a Brennan like the hero of the stories he told of brave men leading forlorn hope charges. Good old Brennan. He had them, all right. Good old Brennan. With their backs to the wall, their hands high above their heads, stood, slim, gray, Louis and Joe, ghastly pale, staring as if they were hypnotized at the pistol that pointed toward them. "Drop that sap," Brennan snapped. The blackjack fell from Louis's appraised hand, bouncing as it hit his shoulder and dropped to the floor. "How badly are you hurt, Gallant?" Brennan asked, without looking away from his three prisoners. I'm all right," John replied, struggling to his feet. "Good old Brennan," he added, essaying a smile. "Good old nothing," said Brennan. "Wrap a towel around that head of yours, and if you think you can make it, get downstairs to a phone. Get Sweeney, he's back at Central Station now." John staunched the flow of blood with a towel and, faint from the reflex action of the blows he had endured, walked falteringly out of the room. At the door Brennan stepped to one side to allow him to pass, but never took his eyes from the three men with their hands above their heads. The clerk at the corner cigar store gaped when John, the crimson-stained towel swathed about his head, walked into the telephone. In less than a minute he had Chief Sweeney on the wire. "Chief, this is Gallant, John Gallant," he said. "Yes, what is it?" "We've got the men who beat up Murphy." "Where?" "In Murphy's room. Brennan is covering three of them with a gun now. Come as fast as you can." His strength returning gradually, John walked a little more steadily as he hurried back to the room. Brennan and his prisoners were in the same positions as when he left them. "You're lucky I didn't kill you as soon as I came in," he heard Brennan say to the three against the wall. "If Gallant had been out I would have killed you. It's a good long stretch in San Quentin or the rope for all of you if Murphy dies." Slim and his two bruisers glared at their captor. "I know what you're thinking," Brennan continued. "You're thinking about rushing me. You think I could only get one of you before the other two got me. Each of you would start right now if you were sure you weren't the one I'd get. That's what you're thinking, and if you weren't all cowards you'd come at me. Well, why don't you try it? But before you do, let me show you something. See that picture of Jack Johnson on the wall over there? See how small the head is? Well, watch this." With a jerk of his wrist he tossed the gun into the air, caught it by the butt, and the roar of a shot shook the room. He had fired a second after the pistol was in his hand. Where Jack Johnson's head had been on the print was a hole about the size of a 5-cent piece. "Come on, now, try rushing me," said Brennan, quietly. Slim, Louie and Joe, their eyes returning to Brennan from the hole in the wall, continued to stare at him like hypnotized men. A white, scared face showed in the doorway. It was the proprietor, roused by the pistol shot. He was almost bowled over a few seconds later when Sweeney, with a squad of detectives, all with guns in their hands, burst into the room. John saw them snap handcuffs on Slim and the two bashers, and then the room began going around and the figures before him began floating up and down. There was a roaring sound in his ears and everything went black. His knees sagging, he sank slowly to the floor. He dreamed a dream that was half nightmare and half ecstasy before he regained complete consciousness. First he was in a room without doors battling alone against an endless line of alternate Louis and Joes who vanished when he struck them. Then he was on the floor waiting to be kicked by a pair of legs that had no body and that tormented him by dancing a jig to the rhythm of a sing-song rendition of Gunga Din. When the bodiless legs disappeared he found himself mingling in an everyday Spring Street crowd with a towel turban stained with blood on his head and wondering why none paid the slightest attention to him or his strange headgear. Alma Sprocket stopped him at a corner and begged him not to tell something he knew nothing of, and he promised her he wouldn't tell and went on his way racking his brain to remember what she had said to him. A life-size photograph of Consuelo came to life, stepped out of its frame in a theater lobby and sailed through a casement window bordered with red geraniums until it reached the top of a hill, marked with a signboard, on which were the words, "Green and Friendly." He sat at her feet on the hilltop and told her all the earth was servant to just the two of them. They were supremely happy sitting there, for days and weeks and years, until a crimson rain fell and a terrible thunder roared. Bolts of lightning crashed all around him and a splinter from one of the bolts was embedded in his eye and his head began to ache, and then he opened his eyes. He was in a bed at the receiving hospital. Putting a hand to his face he felt a bandage over the cut in his cheek, made by Louis's blackjack, and gauze, held in place by strips of adhesive tape covering the laceration over his eyes made by Joe's brass knuckles. His right hand was in a stiff, straight bandage, the fingers held flat by splints. Brennan and the chief surgeon were standing at his bedside. "Hello," he said and his voice sounded far away from him. "Hello," said Brennan, "how are you feeling?" "My head aches," he said. "You'll be all right," said the surgeon. "You fainted from nervous exhaustion and loss of blood and we brought you down here and fixed you up. You cracked 2 knuckles of your right hand and you have lacerations that we sutured on your forehead and your cheek. You can get up as soon as you feel strong enough." "What time is it?" he asked. "It's a little after midnight," Brennan replied, as the surgeon left the room. "Tell me," he asked, "how did it happen that you got there in time to save me?" "I telephoned to PQ after dinner to tell him that I had Ben Smith's transcript and he told me about Murphy," Brennan explained. "He told me to find you at the receiving hospital here. When I got here they told me you had gone to the detective bureau and at the bureau I learned that you had gone to Murphy's room. I hurried down there and as I got near the door of the room I heard a crash. It must have been when you threw the water pitcher. Luckily I had my gun with me. I drew it and pushed open the door. As soon as they saw me standing there with the gun in my hand they lifted their hands above their heads and started backing up. You know the rest of it." "You saved my life," said John. "If you're going to start talking like that I'll leave you right now, understand?" said Brennan. "What happened after I fainted?" he asked, realizing that Brennan meant what he said. "We took Slim and the other two to the university station and locked them up," said Brennan. "That is, Sweeney and his men took them while I brought you here. I had Sweeney take 'em out to University Station because the other reporters would find out about it if we booked them at Central Station and our whole story would have been in their hands. There's one thing I can't understand, John said. What's that? Asked Brennan. Why didn't Slim, or Louie and Joe shoot me when I put up a fight? He asked. That's easy to explain, said Brennan. They didn't try shooting because the sound of a shot would have roused the occupants of the house or have been heard by someone on the street. As it is, Slim and the two others have been identified as the men seen leaving the place after Murphy was beaten up. And how is poor Tim? He asked. There's very little hope for him, Brennan said. They've taken him to the Clara Barton Hospital and the mayor has employed 2 more physicians to stay with him and do everything they can for him. Has Sweeney arrested the gink? No, Cummings has disappeared, can't find him anywhere. What about Gibson? I don't know, said Brennan. No one has tried to find him yet. There'll be plenty of time for that after we come out with our blast in the first edition. And that reminds me, PQ is at the office now, waiting for me. We'll work the rest of the night and have everything ready to be set in type by 7 o'clock. I'm sorry you won't be able to help us. You had better get some rest so that you'll be strong enough to be on your feet in the morning. Will you arrange to get word to my mother that I won't be able to get home? He asked. Tell her that I must work all night at the office. Don't give her any hint that I'm hurt. I'll arrange it, Brennan assured him, starting toward the door. Just a minute, said John, bringing his unbandaged hand above the covers. Brennan stopped and, turning, saw the hand extended toward him. I don't care what you say, Brennan, John said, you've got to shake hands with me. Brennan hesitated and then returned to the bedside, grasping John's hand. For a moment they regarded each other silently. You saved my life, Brennan, and I'll never forget it, said John slowly. If it had not been for you I would be where Murphy is and you know it. If it had not been for Murphy they would have got both of us, said Brennan. They went to him to try to find out who we were and I don't believe he told them. How was it they returned to the room when I was there? John asked. I don't know, they probably spotted you when you found Murphy, but I'm willing to stake my life on it that Murphy was game to the last. Brennan, said John, I'm beginning to think you have a little faith in mankind after all. Brennan smiled as he dropped John's hand. Perhaps I have, he said. Now go to sleep, he added, because there's a great day ahead of us. He closed the door softly behind him, leaving John alone with his thoughts. And his thoughts were of Consuelo. He wondered where she would be during the great day before them when she read or learned of the exposure of Gibson's alliance with Gink Cummings, of the horrible pommeling given Murphy, of the attack upon himself. What would Gibson say to her? What could he say to her? He wished that Gibson would disappear as Brennan had told him Cummings had. If Gibson wanted to be merciful that's what he would do, disappear, leave her to think the worst or the best of him, as she chose. Pondering over everything that had occurred since the first day he met him, John concluded that Gibson's single weakness, his inability to give up his social position when he found himself stranded financially, had worked his ruin. That love of the niceness of conventionality, as Consuelo had described it, that irresistible desire to live an easy life when he should have worked to restore his family fortune, had led him into trouble. At the moment when he was broke, when circumstances were such that he would be compelled to withdraw as the society man, Gink Cummings, scheming to seize control of the city government, had tempted him and he had fallen. He sold himself to the boss of the underworld and became perfidious and a puppet so that he might have money and fame while it lasted. How Gibson suffered by comparison with the example set by Consuelo. When the vast wealth that had once been the Carrillos dwindled and only the few acres of land with the old home was left, she went to work and was loved and respected for what she had done. She had not lost caste by her venture into worldly affairs. That was where Gibson had been short-sighted. He had believed that he would lose standing if he was forced to work for a living, so he took the easier way and like all easier ways, it wrought destruction of his morals, his conscience and his reputation. From this retrospective philosophizing with the lesson that it taught, John turned to dreaming of Consuelo as the one he loved. His imagination, from which he slipped the leash of worry and care, pictured for him gloriously delightful, utterly impossible scenes, Consuelo and he on a yacht skimming the rolling waves of the ocean off Catalina, leisurely inspecting some gabled foreign town, she another Princess Patricia with silken gowns, and jewels for her hair, loving and wedding him, a commoner, like the real princess husband, despite the frowns of kings and queens, and settling down to rule a Graustark-like little kingdom. When he awoke the following morning, a hospital attendant brought him his suit, cleaned and pressed, with a new shirt and collar which, he learned, had been left for him by Brennan. His head had ceased its aching, and after breakfast he could only feel a trace of the weakness that had caused him to faint the night before. As he entered the local room of the newspaper office, PQ stopped work to rush toward him, and Brennan, looking up from his typewriter, emitted a rousing cheer. Chapter 23. All that day the giant presses roared, turning out thousands upon thousands of the newspapers with the story stripping the mask off Gibson and revealing the nefarious plot between him and Gink Cummings. All day long delivery trucks piled high with bundles of the papers distributed them to newsboys in the downtown district and throughout the city. Never in the history of Los Angeles had there ever been such a tremendous single-day issue of a newspaper. Under the glaring headlines was Benton's flashlight photograph of Gibson and Cummings emerging from the rear door of the Spring Street saloon where their conversation had been overheard by the reporters. The picture was clear enough to enable anyone who knew either of them to recognize them both. On one side of the cut was Brennan's signed and copyrighted story of the complete exposure of the alliance between the police commissioner and the underworld boss, a clear, concise, dramatic narrative of every event leading up to the denouement. On the other side was Ben Smith's stenographic transcript of the conversation between the conspirators, with all its telltale and condemning elements. Beneath the cut were reproductions of affidavits by John, Brennan, Smith, the mayor, Big Jim, Hatch and Evelyn Hatch, swearing to the facts contained in Brennan's comprehensive story that jumped from the first page and filled the second. On pages 3 and 4 were photographs of Gibson and the mayor, Brennan and Gallant, his face in bandages, Murphy on his cot at the hospital, Murphy's room, the mayor's automobile with its shattered windshield, Gink Cummings, Slim, Gray, Joe and Louie, and reproductions of their blackjack and brass knuckles. There were separate stories dealing in detail with John's experience in Gibson's raid on the Spring Street bookmakers, the regulation of the crime wave by Cummings to enable Gibson to add to his false reputation as the feared enemy of crooks, Big Jim, Hatch's story of how he had been arrested by Gibson because he would not split money he stole in bunco swindles with Cummings, the beating up of Murphy and the attack on John, Evelyn Hatch's corroboration of her husband's claims, and the pistol shots fired by either Gibson or Cummings, or both, the night they were trapped in the saloon. A strongly worded editorial branded Gibson as the worst traitor the city had ever known and demanded his immediate retirement as a police commissioner and candidate for mayor. Police detectives, it was announced, were searching for Cummings, who would be arrested as soon as he was located, and held for murder if Murphy died. Mr. Phillips, the publisher, called John, Brennan and PQ to his private office, and after he had commended them for their work they rejoiced together, not only because their paper had frustrated the scheming, Gink, and exposed Gibson, his tool, but because they had beat all other papers in the city with the story, acknowledged to be the greatest scoop ever scored in Los Angeles. A master musician lives for the applause of his audiences, a great discoverer or inventor has his public acclaim, a statesman or public benefactor is rewarded by the voice of the people, but the gratification of a newspaper man in having accomplished a notable achievement for his paper is his only recompense, and it is sufficient. No medals are pinned on his chest, no roar of applause comes up to him from the multitudes, but he is satisfied. His glory is his own and he is content. 2 hours after the first edition was on the streets, the publisher received a hastily appointed committee representing the Church Federation, the women's clubs and other organizations that had supported and endorsed Gibson as a candidate for mayor. The evidence, no more than what had been published, was certified to this committee. The Church Federation was the first to act. Unable to locate Gibson to question him personally concerning the exposure and accepting the evidence against him as final, the Federation authorized the publication of its withdrawal of endorsement of him as a candidate for mayor and an expression of appreciation of the newspaper's work in bringing the truth to light. Similar action by the other organizations that had been deceived by Gibson followed quickly, and before night his political strength had melted away to nothing. Forgotten even was his sensational capture of Red Mike, now serving a life sentence at San Quentin for his attempt to wreck and rob the Southern Pacific Lark train. Every newspaper reporter in Los Angeles was engaged in the search for Gibson that followed the publication of the exposure of his plot with Cummings. The other papers, anxious to retaliate by obtaining the first statement from Gibson for the blow given them when they were scooped, combined their forces in a frantic effort to find him before John and Brennan could do so. The missing man's office and apartment were closed. His secretary, located after a search of several hours, could give no information concerning his disappearance. The railroad, steamship and automobile bus stations had sold no ticket to anyone answering his description. He seemed to have vanished completely. A theory was advanced that he had fled with Gink Cummings, and this was gradually accepted generally as the hours passed and no trace of him could be found. Brennan waited until they were alone before he suggested to John that Consuelo might be able to furnish a clue to Gibson's whereabouts. Thoughts of her had been flashing in and out of John's mind during the excitement of the morning. He realized that if anyone knew where Gibson was, it would be Consuelo, and again he had the disheartening apprehension that, faithful to her love, she might be in flight with the man she was to have married. "I don't like to speak of it, she's probably very much upset by what has happened today, but there's only one person who may know where Gibson is," said Brennan, "and that's Miss Carrillo." "I'd rather do almost anything than face her, today," said John. "You mean with your face bandaged up the way it is?" Brennan asked, a twinkle in his eyes. "I don't know what she will think of me," John said, ignoring the jest. "She has believed in Gibson, and she may think that what I have helped to do is a violation of the friendship between us and that I am an ungrateful and deceitful wretch." "Don't you want to see her and explain things to her?" "No, not until she sends for me." "Suppose she never sends for you, what then?" "Then I'll know that she never wants to see me, and that will be the end of it, I suppose." They were silent for a moment, and then, while John was pondering over the thoughts that were in his mind when he had said, "the end of it, I suppose," Brennan, without another word, quoted a quatrain from the verse that he had recited while they were waiting to overhear the conversation between Gibson and Cummings. "So long as pleasure calls us up, and duty drives us down, if you love me as I love you, what pair so happy as we two?" John glanced up quickly and saw that Brennan was pretending he just happened to think of the verse and had quoted it with no particular intention or reference to the thoughts of either of them. "And duty drives us down," he repeated, smiling. A little later all thoughts of Gibson and the suggestion that Consuelo be consulted in the search for him fled from their heads when they were called by telephone and told that Murphy was sinking rapidly and was not expected to live many more hours. Together they hurried to the Clara Barton Hospital. "I wish he could know that the brutes who beat him have been arrested," said Brennan as they turned west into 5th Street from Broadway. "I tried to talk to them, to find out from 'em what poor Tim said and did before they knocked him out, but they wouldn't answer. They know what they're up against if he dies, and their lawyer has told them to keep their mouths shut. I had the satisfaction of telling them, though, that I'd be on hand to write the story when they are hanged and that I was looking forward to the assignment. Slim almost broke down when I said it." The mayor, 2 doctors and a nurse were in the room when they entered. Murphy lay inert on the bed. He had never regained consciousness, the doctors said, and he was in such a weakened condition that only a miracle beyond the skill of surgery and medicine could save him. The mayor looked at them in silence as they approached the bed beside which he was seated in a chair. They saw that there were tears in his eyes, tears that he was not ashamed of others seeing. For a quarter of an hour they stood at the bedside while one of the doctors frequently felt Murphy's wrist to catch the fluttering pulse. Then a sound came from the bandaged head and the doctor leaned over, putting his ear close to the hidden face. They heard the sound again and realized it was a whisper. "He's saying something about the gallant kid," said the doctor, looking up. John moved to the head of the bed and, leaning over it, said, "Yes, Murphy, I'm here." The whisper rose a little, becoming audible throughout the room. "I'm croaking, I guess, ain't I?" it asked. "You're all right, Tim," John managed to say. "I didn't squeal, kid, they got me. I didn't tell them it was you and Brennan." "We know you didn't, Murphy. I wanna tell ya something, before I go, see." The whisper became fainter. "I wasn't workin' for ya, for da Jack, ya gave me, see. I did it 'cause, my old man, the whisper stopped. "Yes, Tim. 'Cause, my old man, was Red Mike, see." A quick intake of breath by Brennan was the only sound that broke the tense silence. "So, I wasn't, no, dirty, stool, pigeon," the whisper stopped again. Murphy drew his last breath and with it he said his last word, "see." The news of Murphy's death was printed in the late editions. His voice shaking with suppressed emotion, Brennan dictated the brief announcement of the passing of the Twisted Nose youth by telephone to the office. "Tim Murphy, who was brutally beaten by Gink Cummings thugs yesterday, died at the Clara Barton Hospital as a result of his injuries late today," Brennan said over the phone. At the other end of the wire a reporter was taking the dictation on a typewriter. Before he died, Murphy regained consciousness long enough to disclose that he was the son of Red Mike, now serving a life sentence for having attempted to wreck the Southern Pacific Lark. It was because he believed his father had been the victim of former police commissioner Gibson's lust for glory, he said, that he aided in disclosing Gibson's plot with Cummings to seize control of the city government. His death means that Slim, Gray, Cummings' right-hand man, and his two strong-arm men now under arrest, will be charged with murder and that a murder complaint will be issued against Cummings. They were silent as they wove their way through the hurrying streams of men and women in Fifth Street homeward bound after the work of the day in downtown stores and offices. On the corners newsboys were still selling editions of their paper with the exposure of the Gibson-Cummings plot as fast as they could hand them out. They saw several men stop where they had bought the paper and stand, jostled by the crowd, reading the story absorbedly, apparently amazed by what was on the printed page beneath their eyes. From the corner of Fifth and Broadway, where he left Brennan waiting for a streetcar, John went to the receiving hospital to have the wounds on his face and his maimed hand dressed again before he started home. The gauze bandages on his forehead and cheek were replaced with strips of medicated plaster which were less conspicuous, but it would be more than 2 weeks, the hospital surgeon told him, before the splints could be removed from his hand. His mother was at the door to meet him when he arrived home. Her face paled as she saw the plaster hiding the cuts on his cheek and forehead and the bandage on his hand. He took her in his arms quickly. "I'm all right, Mother, dearest," he said. "Don't worry, I'm all right. My boy, my boy. Why didn't you let me know you were hurt?" There, Mother," he said, softly patting her with his uninjured hand. "It's nothing to worry about. I've only a couple of scratches on my face and my hand is hurt a little." He led her into the living room and, seating her in a rocking chair, he dropped to his knees at her feet, as he had in the grief and despair that stunned him when his father died. With caresses and soft words of assurance he soothed her until her dismay left her. At dinner, which had been waiting for him, he told her everything that had occurred since he left her 24 hours past. At the end of his story he explained to her what it would all mean to him. "The chief, that is Mr. Phillips, our publisher, has promised me a contract at double what I'm getting now," he told her. "And, besides, he says Brennan and I are entitled to a bonus for what we've done. It means, Mother, dearest, that I've made good, that I've arrived as a newspaper man." "You know how proud I am of you, John," Mrs. Gallant said. "I never imagined that newspaper work was so strenuous. I thought a reporter's work was writing news instead of making it. Newspapers, I have learned, Mother, are vigilant guards of the interests of the people," he said. "It is a newspaper's duty to inform the public of what occurs and to prevent as well as condemn wrong. Mr. Phillips told us that the unmasking of Gibson was newspaper enterprise by which the city as well as the paper benefited. Thousands of things not as conspicuous as this are done every year by a newspaper and its reporters and editors. Without publicity wrong would go undetected and unpunished. Think of what would have happened if Gibson had been elected mayor of Los Angeles. For at least 4 years Cummings would have ruled the city and you can imagine what that would have meant." They were about to leave the supper table when Mrs. Sprocket, weeping hysterically, appeared in a state of excitement that alarmed them. Wringing her hands, sobbing distractedly, she flung herself into a chair and moaned in such a way that Mrs. Gallant hurried to her side anxiously. My Alma, my girl," Mrs. Sprocket wept. "What is it? Tell us. Can we help?" asked Mrs. Gallant while John had a momentary apprehension that Mrs. Sprocket's condition might be the result of a discovery that her daughter had visited the corner motion picture theater surreptitiously. "She's gone," Mrs. Sprocket gasped. "Gone," Mrs. Gallant exclaimed. "Gone," Mrs. Sprocket repeated, and then, with a sob of despair, she added, "kidnapped." "You mean she has disappeared?" asked John, feeling that her fear that Alma had been abducted might be far-fetched. "She has been gone since morning," continued Mrs. Sprocket, a little calmed by the sound of a masculine voice. "Ever since morning. Someone has stolen her. Oh, my little girl, someone has stolen her. What shall I do? What shall I do?" "Try to calm yourself," urged Mrs. Gallant. "She will probably return before long." "She left no note, gave no warning?" John asked. "She may have run away of her own accord, you know," he added. Mrs. Sprocket stopped her sobbing and sat upright in her chair. Indignation blazed in her eyes. "How dare you, sir? How dare you?" she demanded, furiously. "How dare you stand there and tell me that my Alma left me of her own free will? My Alma leave her mother who loves her so? My Alma run away like some common scamp? I didn't come here to be insulted like that, sir." A look from his mother caused John to repress an inclination to ask her to tell him really why she came to them. I'm sorry, he apologized. I didn't mean to insinuate. You did. You did. You stood up there and told me that my little girl who loves her mother ran away from home, Mrs. Sprocket cried, irrationally. That's what you did. You stood up there. I'm sorry, interrupted John, moving from the room to avoid the outburst. He stepped out on the porch and found Mrs. Sprocket's husband, coatless and collarless as usual, with the same weary look about his eyes and the same hopeless droop of his narrow, rounded shoulders, mounting the steps. Across the street, in the Sprocket home, the baby wailed and fretted. Beg pardon, began Mrs. Sprocket's husband. I just thought. Yes, she's inside, said John, anticipating the inevitable question. Instead of moving on into the house, Mrs. Sprocket's husband stood where he had stopped. Our Alma, he began. If you want my advice, said John, interrupting again, I would wait until morning if I were you and then ask the police to help you find her. No storm of protest came from Mrs. Sprocket's husband. The instinctive fraternalism of man between man caused him to signal, with a nod of his head, for John to come closer to him. With frequent apprehensive glances toward the door, he whispered. Alma's not a bad girl, but she's been held down too much. She's only 16 and she likes pretty things and picture shows and other things a girl of her age likes naturally. It wouldn't surprise me a bit if she's just picked up and left to go to work someplace and have a little more freedom. She's not a bad girl, she's just a girl, that's all, and she wants to do what other girls do. But, of course, I want her back. John's sympathy swept away the anger that had surged through him when Mrs. Sprocket became irate. I think you're right, he said, remembering how Alma had begged him to refrain from telling anyone that he had seen her leaving the picture show. Don't say a word about what I've said to you, will you? Asked Mrs. Sprocket's husband, involuntarily shrinking away from the steps. Never fear, John assured him, and if I can help, let me know. Thanks, I will, but Maud, well, you know how it is, sometimes, said Mrs. Sprocket's husband. I know, said John, and Sprocket hurried back across the street. A few minutes later the baby's wailing stopped. Mrs. Sprocket's husband appeared on the porch of the Sprocket house with a bundle of blankets in his arms and pacing back and forth, whistled a familiar tune as a lullaby. John listened and distinguished the notes of the father's whistling and smiled to himself as he recognized it as an off-key variation of the Merry Widow Waltz. Mrs. Sprocket, still sobbing, and Mrs. Gallant, with her arm around her, emerged from the house. I'm going to keep Mrs. Sprocket company until she can rest, Mrs. Gallant explained. John watched them cross the street and saw the door close behind them. Soon the whistling ceased and Sprocket and the baby went inside. For half an hour John lolled on the porch, pondering over Alma's disappearance, the abjectedness of Mrs. Sprocket's husband and the spectacle of Mrs. Sprocket's willfulness. Had Mr. and Mrs. Sprocket ever been deeply in love, exulting in the happiness before them in married life? How miserable it was that Sprocket had to whisper to him, not to tell, exactly as Alma had. He found his thoughts distressful and was about to rise, planning an hour with his books before going to sleep, when an automobile, he knew by the outline it was a taxicab, stopped before the house. The driver opened the door and a figure stepped out, hurrying up toward him. As he came to his feet he saw that it was a girl who was approaching him. Mr. Gallant? A familiar voice asked. Yes. The figure came closer to him and he saw that it was Consuelo's friend and companion, Betty. Chapter 24. Abashed by Betty's unexpected appearance at his home and with a sudden fear that something had happened to Consuelo possessing him, John waited for her to speak. He noticed that she had not dismissed the cab that waited at the curb. Can you come with me immediately? She asked, quickly. I want you to see Consuelo, tonight. Did she send you for me? He entreated. No, but I know that she wants you, she replied. Are you sure? He persisted. Don't be a foolish boy, she said, with a gesture of impatience. No one in the world knows Consuelo as well as I do. I am doing this for her. Do you think for a moment that I would be here if I wasn't certain I was doing the proper thing? I know she trusts you, he said, reassured by her mild vexation. Hurry, then, I'll explain things while we're on our way. I'll wait for you in the cab, she said. Mrs. Sprocket's husband answered the door when he crossed the street to the Sprocket home to tell his mother he had been called away. Tell mother that I'm going to see a friend and that I'll be home before it is late, he said. Tell her there's no need to worry about me. Just a minute and I'll call her, Mrs. Sprocket's husband suggested. No, just give her my message, he said, apprehensive of the probable consequences of telling his mother that it was Consuelo he was going to meet. As the cab started away from the curb, he turned to Betty with the question that, in his mind, had been begging for an answer from the moment he recognized her. "How is she?" he asked, his voice betraying his anxiety. "She is very brave," Betty said, earnestly. "Perhaps I should not ask you this, but has she seen Gibson?" So much, he felt, depended on her reply to this question. If Consuelo had already talked with Gibson and Betty divined that she wanted to see him, then perhaps I should not tell you, but she has talked to him. That's as much as I will tell you. The rest must come from her, Betty replied. She had talked with Gibson and yet she wanted to see him. Or, could Betty be mistaken? Had she interpreted Consuelo's mood erroneously in coming for him? "Forgive me for my doubtfulness," he said, "but are you certain that she wants to see me?" A shade of exasperation crossed Betty's face. "You said a moment ago that you knew Consuelo trusted me," she said. "If she trusts me, then why can't you?" Reassured by this pertinent counter-question, he deduced that Betty, with the welfare of Consuelo at heart, had concluded that he might be able to furnish the solace her companion needed in her hour of trial. The ecstasy that had thrilled him when he first realized that he loved Consuelo returned to him as the cab sped through the streets. She knew now why he had beseeched her to think of him as doing what he thought was right. And she had kept her promise. A glance through the window of the cab at a lighted corner told him that they were nearing their destination. "I'm going to leave you alone with her," Betty said, with the frankness that she had displayed when they first met. "I need not ask you to be very considerate, to do everything you can to comfort her. In my heart I feel that what has happened is all for the best. How dreadful it would have been if she had been compelled to make this discovery for herself after they were married. I told her that I would be away until late, that I was busy. We'll stop at the corner to let you out, because she knows that I took a cab when I left and she might suspect that I went for you. Here we are." She called to the driver to stop. "It was kind of you," he began as he stood at the cab door after alighting. She stopped him with a gesture of her hand. Then, leaning forward a little, her eyes dancing with a smile, she said, "Don't you know that I know you love her?" The door closed quickly and the cab spurted away from the curb, leaving him standing bewildered and yet overjoyed by the audacious words she had spoken. So that was why she had called him to Consuelo. If Betty knew it, then Consuelo, too, must realize that he loved her. The thought frightened him. It had never occurred to him before that she might know. Somehow, he had not dared to imagine that she cared enough even to guess that he loved her. He went slowly to the opening in the hedge of boxwood that lined the sidewalk in front of Consuelo's artistic little dream home and turned into the pathway between the patches of rosebushes. A heavy fragrance from the blossoms filled the still night air. As he stepped onto the porch and reached for the knocker with his left hand, he recalled suddenly that his face bore strips of plaster over his wounds and that his right hand was held rigid in splints. The hesitancy that this recollection gave forsook him when he remembered that Betty had made no comment on his appearance, probably because she had seen the photograph of him that had been published in the paper. Emboldened, he rapped with the knocker. She wore the same simple white frock that he had admired when they first met. For a moment she stood with her hand on the knob of the door, the look of surprise in her eyes fading to an expression of mingled pleasure and perplexity. "Come in," she invited. He saw that a tender light, the softness of sympathy, came into her eyes when she noticed the plasters on his forehead and cheek. Then, when she extended her hand to him and he stood awkwardly unable to take it without first disposing of the hat he held, she apologized for her forgetfulness. "I'm sorry," she said, quickly compassionate. "It's nothing," he said. "Only a scratch or two, that's all." They crossed to the fireplace, where she took a chair near the rose-shaded table lamp, the only illumination in the room. He sat opposite her, his back toward the door, waiting for her to speak. "I was thinking of you when you rapped on the door," she said. "I was alone beside my window looking out toward my hill. The darkness of the night prevented me from seeing it, but I knew it was there. Though I could not see it, I looked to it for comfort." "It won't be hidden from you long," he said. "When the morning comes it will be there and the darkness will be gone." "When the morning comes," she said, softly, "there'll be sunshine and flowers and birds, and happiness. But it is there for me now, steadfast, loyal, abiding. I know now why I love the hills more than the ocean. They are so fixed, so permanent, unchanging, unmoving, while the ocean storms and calms, thunders and ripples, lures you to its depths and drowns you. John knew the inner meaning of her words. Sincerity and deceit. Trustworthiness and treachery. Genuineness and make-believe. Was it difficult for you to keep your promise? He asked, breaking the silence that had followed after she had spoken. To understand that you did what you thought was right? She inquired. He nodded. No, she said, I never doubted that. But I was never really put to the test. My decision was made before I thought of what I had promised you. She paused and then, lifting her eyes to meet his, she continued, you see, I believe there is only one real love between a man and a woman, and that is the love that endures all things. I have always thought, and I still do, that a woman who sincerely loves a man will stay by his side even if the whole world is against him. Unless a woman can do that willingly, gladly, I do not believe that it is real love. He came here early Sunday morning and asked me to go away with him. I could not understand and he did not explain. He simply said that something had happened that would prevent him from ever becoming mayor of Los Angeles and that he was going away, never to return. If you love me, you will come with me, he said. I was bewildered, of course, but I knew that he was right. It was the test, a test far greater than I had ever dreamed would come to me. I asked him why it was that he should be compelled to leave the city. He assured me that he had committed no crime. He was very earnest as he spoke and so serious that I knew something terrible had happened. He declared again and again that he loved me and that if I loved him I would go with him and ask no questions. It was all so overwhelming that I begged him to leave me, to let me decide alone. I will let you know, tonight, I told him. Unless you hear from me you will know that I have decided I cannot do what you have asked me. Soon after he was gone I realized that I did not love him with the one great love. I knew that I didn't because I had not thrown myself into his arms and told him, as Ruth told Naomi, for whither thou goest I will go, and where thou lodgest I will lodge. I need not tell you in details of how bewildered I was by his strange request and what I went through when I found that I did not really love him. Of course, I tried to imagine what had occurred that caused him to ask me to leave everything and go away with him. Whatever it was, I felt it was cowardly of him to leave unless it was all his own fault. So he did not hear from me last night and this morning I read of what he stands accused. But I was prepared. I had chosen my course and what I read only made me certain that I was right, that I did not truly love him, never had and never could. I pitied his weakness. I could see how he had gone astray. You see, I have often wondered how it was he had money so suddenly after everything he once had gone from him. The source of his wealth was always a mystery to me. She paused and looking toward the casement window with its red geraniums, she added, softly, that is my story. That is what has happened. In the silence that followed they were both startled to hear footsteps on the porch outside. Consuelo looked toward him, quickly, with an expression that warned him. The door swung open and Gibson stepped in, closing it behind him. I thought I'd find you here, he said. His face was pale and a smile that was half a sneer was on his lips as he stood looking at them. John was on his feet facing him and a glance showed that Consuelo had also risen from her chair at Gibson's unexpected entrance. The girl who said that she loved me and the man who pretended he was my friend, said Gibson, sarcastically. John's muscles tightened and he bit his lip to restrain the words of warning to Gibson that he was about to speak. If you have come here to, he heard Consuelo say, coolly, evenly. I came here to say goodbye to you, Gibson interrupted, and to make certain that there had not been some mistake. I thought you might have tried to reach me last night and failed, or that you might have changed your mind. He paused a moment before adding, but I know better now. You should have known last night, Consuelo said. You should have known that if I had decided to do what you asked me I would have come to you, found you wherever you were. I should have known months ago, if I had not been such a blind fool, said Gibson bitterly. You were a blind fool, said Consuelo, but not as I suspect you think. You were blinded by your own selfish indolence. You said a moment ago that I told you I loved you. I did tell you that and I thought that I meant it, but when I found that I could not go with you as you asked I knew I had been mistaken. You must remember that I decided against you before I knew the reason you wanted me to leave. The half-sarcastic smile curled Gibson's lips. Then you'll admit that something else, someone else, perhaps, he said. I saw no one, except Betty, from the time you left until Mr. Gallant came this evening, Consuelo said. I'm thankful that I was able to decide before I read what was in the paper today. Reggie, how often have I told you my conception of love? Don't you know that if I cared for you nothing would have kept me from you? I cannot tell you why it was, I can only tell you how. I knew as soon as I realized that I had refused to go with you blindly that it was not love, the real love, that I had in my heart for you. And suppose I had not asked you to go away with me? Suppose I came to you tonight and asked you to stand by me, right here in Los Angeles? It would have been the same, Consuelo replied quietly. I would have given you the same answer. As she spoke, Gibson gazed at her intently, and the anger that had smoldered in his eyes disappeared, and he forced a smile to his lips as he turned toward John. Gallant, he said, I saw you take terrible punishment one night and stagger to your feet until you were knocked senseless. I admired you that night, Gallant, I envied your courage. When Charlie Murray made his little talk, I think I was the first to respond. If you found a $50 bill in what Charlie turned over to you, you know now who tossed it into the ring. He paused, looked to the floor and then back into John's face. Tonight you have watched me take my punishment, he continued. I stood on my feet and cheered when you came back into the ring and when you left. I don't want pity or sympathy, but I want you to have a cheer in your heart for me when I go. Gibson's change from sarcasm and bitterness to a show of manliness relieved the tenseness of the situation. Consuelo sank into a chair and, gazing into the fireplace, where flames had once sparkled as bright as her romance with Gibson and now only cold ashes remained, left the two men facing each other. No one has ever doubted your courage, John said. I hope you do not think that I had anything to do with the death of Murphy or the attack upon yourself, said Gibson. If I had known what they were going to do, I would have died fighting them. I took Cummings' gun from him when he fired at you and the others in the automobile. From that minute I have neither seen nor heard from him. If I ever run across him, I'll bring him back and surrender him to the district attorney. That is the way I hope to win condonement for what I've done. That is where I'm going when I leave here tonight, to search for him, to the ends of the earth if it is necessary. If ever, while you're away, you need help, let me know, John said, with an impulsive desire to take Gibson's hand. But he stood still, waiting for the other to continue. When I came here tonight and found you two together, I said things that I'm sorry ever escaped my lips, said Gibson. I was a cad, and no matter what you may think of me for the other things I've done, I want you to forgive me, both of you, for that alone. Their silence assured him that they were anxious to forget his display of bitterness. Will you do me this favor, Gallant? He continued. Will you publish tomorrow that you have seen me and that I've started search for Cummings and won't return to Los Angeles until I bring him back with me? Just that much and no more. That much and no more, John promised. Then Gibson turned toward Consuelo. She had bowed her head in her hand. He hesitated a moment and then walked slowly to the side of her chair. Goodbye, Connie, he said. She looked up at him, tears brimming in her eyes, her underlip caught between her teeth. He tried to force a smile to his lips, but it balked. Goodbye, she said, and her voice trembled. He turned away quickly, as if he felt he could not trust himself to be at her side a second longer. He stopped again, facing John. Just one thing more, Gallant, he said. Yes, said John, his voice queerly out of pitch. Gibson looked him straight in the eyes. You love her, don't you? He asked. Unable to speak what was in his heart, John stood silent. He moistened his lips with his tongue and wondered why it was he could not shout back his answer. Flustered by the boldness of the question put to him so directly, a thought flashed into his mind of Betty's frank declaration that she knew he loved Consuelo. Then he discovered the reason why his mother had been so perturbed by his frequent meetings with her. She, too, undoubtedly knew he was in love. While these thoughts were racing through his head, Gibson put his hand on his shoulder. You need not answer, Gallant, he said, because your silence is enough. Regardless of how incongruous it seems in view of the great wrong I have done her, I love her, too. And, because I love her, I can tell that you do. I can see it by the way you speak to her, the way you look at her, and unless I am greatly mistaken, she knows it as well as you and I do. He grasped John's left hand in his own. Take care of her, Gallant, love her and try to make her happy, he said. He turned and walked to the door, leaving John speechless and motionless, staring after him. At the threshold he wheeled to face him again. Exit, the villain, he said slowly and smiling. The door closed behind him and his footsteps, taking him steadily, not too fast, not too slowly, from the house, diminished until the only sound audible in the room was the ticking of the clock on the mantel of the fireplace. John, his back toward Consuelo, his eyes on the door, wondering whether it was all a dream, a cheer in his heart for the man who had left him so dramatically, feared to move. Exit. The villain, Gibson's last words, echoed in his brain. He imagined he heard Brennan saying, a grandstander to the last. When he finally turned around, Consuelo was standing by the open casement window, looking out into the night, her fingers touching the petals of the geraniums on the sill, in the same position in which she had stood when she had recited to him the little verse with its simple, homely philosophy. He moved to her side, marveling at her unaffected beauty. Looking out of the window he saw that the moon, which had been hidden by the clouds an hour before, had crested her green and friendly hill with an outline of silvery blue. Something in her pose that suggested to him that she was waiting for him to speak gave him the courage. Yet he was afraid to look at her as he spoke, afraid to see what effect his words had upon her. I do love you, he said. That little gasp as she caught her breath, what did it mean? Still unable to face her, he continued. He knew it, Betty knows it, Mother knows it, and I want the whole world to know it, I love you. He could say no more. Gently, caressingly, her small white fingers touched his unbandaged hand. Tremulously he turned his head and saw her answer in her eyes, and slowly, almost reverently, he lifted her hand to his lips. A mockingbird broke into joyous song in a tree outside, a golden flood of music to mock the silent song in his heart. Lights were shining through the curtains on the windows of the Sprocket house, and his mother was waiting up for him when he returned home. As he took her in his arms to kiss her forehead tenderly, he had a fantasy that the wonderfulness of his requited love had miraculously altered his mother's opinion of Consuelo. But it was a fantasy, only that. Mother, dearest, he whispered, I'm the happiest man in the world, tonight. His mother drew back from him, and the intuition that had advised her that her son was in love with Consuelo, long before he realized it himself, told her the reason for his happiness. She turned away and, pressing a handkerchief to her eyes, left him with a discordant note breaking the harmony of his ecstasy. Chapter 25. A doctor is awarded his diploma, a lawyer is admitted to the bar, a preacher is given a pulpit, an actor rises from understudy to the leading role, a newspaper reporter is given a byline, and sees his name over a story for the first time. Under the big headline, Gibson found, quits race, and over the announcement Gibson had authorized, that much and no more, appeared the magic words, by John Gallant. By that simple token he passed automatically from the position of cub to be a full-fledged reporter. The only ceremony marking the graduation was when Brennan, leaning over his shoulder as he gazed at his byline, said in his ear, "Looks pretty nice, doesn't it?" The story stated plainly that Gibson authorized the publication of the statement that he was leaving Los Angeles to search for Gink Cummings and did not intend returning until he brought Cummings back with him to face trial for the murder of Murphy, as co-defendant with Slim Gray and his two bashers. John explained to PQ that he had given his word of honor that he would print nothing but the brief announcement. With the city editor's consent he omitted mentioning where he had met Gibson and under what circumstances Gibson had talked with him. "A newspaper reporter's word must be as good as his bond," said PQ. "Remember, Gallant, never to print what you have received in confidence. I fired more than one reporter because he broke his word, although in breaking it he gave us a whale of an exclusive story." Shortly after the first edition was on the streets, John looked up from his typewriter to find Mrs. Sprocket standing beside his desk, about to speak to him. Nervous, distressed, her eyes reddened from a sleepless night of weeping, she asked him if he was too busy to spare her a moment. "Not at all," he said, rising and placing a chair for her beside his desk. Fumbling with her handkerchief and appearing apologetic for having spoken to him so sharply the night before, she told him that Alma had been away from home all night and had not returned yet. "Then, Mrs. Sprocket, there's only one thing for you to do," he said, "and that is to inform the police." "I have just come from the police station," Mrs. Sprocket said. "They sent me here. They told me that the best way to find a missing girl was through the newspapers. They said that in 99 cases out of 100 girls who disappear are either found or traced by the newspapers and newspapermen. Of course, you know how much I regret having anything concerning Alma appear in the newspapers. I thought there was some other way to find her, some way that would attract less attention. But if it has to be, it has to be, and I'll do anything to bring my little girl back to us." "You will do the sensible thing if you permit the publication of Alma's picture and a brief story that she is missing," John said. Mrs. Sprocket drew from her bag a photograph of her daughter and gave John a description of her and the facts relative to her disappearance. "If anything has happened to her it will kill me," she said, as she rose to go. I owe a debt I can never repay to the one who brings her back to me." The photograph of Alma and the brief story that went with it appeared in the second edition, and John wondered if Mrs. Sprocket's husband had dared to make the suggestion that had sent his wife to the police. Soon after Mrs. Sprocket left the office, John, unable to wait a minute longer without hearing her voice, telephoned to Consuelo's home. He wanted to tell her again that he loved her, and again, and he wanted to hear her tell him, as she had before he left her, that her dreamings had come true, the brightest and the best. But it was Betty instead of Consuelo who answered his call. "Connie is at the studio," Betty said. "She was called there unexpectedly concerning something about her new picture." "Did she tell you anything before she left?" he asked. Betty laughed. "She told me everything," she replied. "And is she happy?" he asked. "Happier than I have ever seen her," Betty assured him. "I'll tell her that you called. That I called and that he stopped himself. "Love her," Betty finished for him. "More and more every minute," he said, not to be abashed by Betty's good-natured presumptuousness. But whenever throughout the day his thoughts of Consuelo and their great love brought him happiness, the haunting realization that his mother still clung to her prejudice against her occupation wore upon him. He had gone to his room after she had left him the night before, and at breakfast there had been a strained effort by both of them to avoid recalling the cause for her distress. He had pleaded and begged her so often to overcome her intolerant dislike for Consuelo that he was beginning to fear he would never be able to win her over. Not for much longer, he realized, could he keep his mother's feelings against her from Consuelo. Late in the afternoon, when the clatter of the telegraph instruments and the typewriter had lulled, and tired men lounged, squatted on desks and tilted back in chairs in the local room discussing the events of the day, John and Brennan were summoned to the publisher's private office. There they were confronted by PQ and the chief, the managing editor and the news editor, the quartet often referred to by the reporters as the Brain Trust. There John and Brennan received checks for $500 each and were informed that their salaries had been doubled, the $500 being a bonus for their work in exposing the Gibson-Cummings plot. On his way home, John decided to make one final effort to change his mother's attitude toward Consuelo. He planned it all very carefully. First he would tell her of how his salary had been doubled, and then he would turn over to her the bonus check to be banked. Then he would take her in his arms and beg her to listen while he told her of the love between him and Consuelo, whom he was to meet later in the evening. He was absorbed in thinking of everything he would say to his mother when he got off the streetcar at the corner and walked toward his home. It was not until he was within a quarter of a block from his home when he saw something that brought him to a sharp halt.